Hello, and welcome to another video in the Secret Tree of Alchemy series of videos. Today I'm going to be discussing the astrological sign of Cancer and the two trump cards that are assigned to that astrological sign in the Secret Tree of Alchemy layout of tarot cards. The two trump cards to be discussed today include the Eliza Crowley versions of the Chariot and Fortune. Fortune is assigned to the planet Jupiter, which rules over Cancer, and the Chariot is the trump card assigned to the astrological sign of Cancer. It's the face card in the stack of cards in the Secret Tree of Alchemy assigned to Cancer. Directly behind that, there is Fortune, and then behind those cards you have the aces in the four elements. If you want to, you can very easily make the Prince cards at home in Cancer too, from a self-orientation perspective, where the element of the earth is assigned. And then as far as the water element is assigned, that being a situation orientation for Cancer, you could place the queens in here too to compare with these assigned cards. The princes being earth elemental in the Secret Tree of Alchemy, they would be associated with the self-orientation maintained by this perspective we call the astrological sign of Cancer. Okay, all the different signs in the Secret Tree of Alchemy and in astrology represent perspectives taken. They all orient relative to each other. The central concept in these cards, you would associate a set. And the concept of a set, of course, is assigned to Cancer, along with such things as an account, like a banking account, a reservoir for supplying water to a city, any kind of a significant reserve of relatively serene disposition is maintained here in Cancer. Concepts such as home, a safe place, trust, comfort even, and related serenity. Serenity is assigned here as this concept. Meditation, the basic practice of is assigned here as it applies to inward and outward focus. These two trump cards relate those ideas, inward and outward focuses of different kinds that are related together. And, of course, associated with this is the concept of a wheel or a sphere or a toroid. Anything that's like a completed shape in geometry you could assign to Cancer, especially things like circles, ellipses, egg shapes that are completed. They're whole. They can be considered in holistic terms, I guess you could say. The concept of a curved line being assigned to Gemini, which is immediately previous to Cancer in the Secret Tree of Alchemy, as far as the steps taken to explicate reality into absolute manifestation, or clear manifestation, right? Clear existence. There are signs placed in the imagery to these cards that relate them rather closely together as assigned to Cancer. Okay, central in this, of course, is the wheel. The turning wheel, or the wheel stationary, but a turning wheel, implies a certain kind of travel. And in this case, we're looking at a kind of travel associated with Cancer, which is relatively serene as a consideration, or tranquil even. Serenely tranquil consideration, perspective-wise, as far as, experience goes. Cancer as a consideration of experience is right at the very edge of human experience, okay, and perceptive, capacities, along with Leo. Leo, of course, initiates automaticity in the form of behaviors that are initiated in the unconscious, that being an example. But That's not nearly as serene an expression as is Cancer perspective, right? It's an expression in nature that just came into reality from out of Gemini. If you think of Gemini as pure movement or pure light, complete movement. Cancer is something that's serenely tranquilized out of Gemini into vast but complete existence. Still touches upon the infinite in the sense that you can't typically imagine a boundary for the universe, right? Though you can conceptualize it as somehow finite in comparison with Gemini. Gemini is typically taken into consideration at the top of these particular cards with the stars up there, symbolic form stars. The expression, of course, being daylight hours, which means, the Sphinx up there is focused on the works of others or presentations made by others. And these would be, clear presentations of some kind or another, i.e. the language used, or abracadabra in the Chariot card. I believe that's what it spells up there. The language is fully appropriate and technically concise in its expression to be linguistically sound, right? Yeah, the matrix, the Gemini aspect of the matrix is towards the top of these two cards, and then the Cancer aspect of matrix considerations fills out the rest of the card. Down towards the bottom of the card where you're getting into Libra and Capricorn considerations down there. Okay, because the orientations of these cards all relate to each other in the Secret Tree of Alchemy as far as location is concerned, right? Aries is directly above Cancer in the Secret Tree of Alchemy, but not in any kind of practical terms, as Aries is completely impractical, right? But Gemini is up there, and Taurus is up there too, so it's positively sparkling up there with stardom, right? In Gemini, stars are here for a time and then they're gone, just like the divine sparks. And the concept of seeing, Aries sees through these divine sparks into reality, supposedly, or senses. Aries being an expression of pure sensation, which is another one of those impossible concepts assigned to Aries. So this Gemini symbolism relates functional infinity, symbolized by the mathematical sign of infinity. It kind of touches on Cancer and analogy in it being a completed shape, but there's kind of a little twist in the center, right? Throws the sign up into Gemini as, that little twist in the center symbolizes Taurus. So overall, the sign symbolizes Gemini, right? But a symbol is typically something complete, which means in practical considerations, a symbol establishes itself, same as nature does in Cancer, on a universal level of some kind, or a holistic level, a complete level, an overall systematic level, from out of what you might call a baseline function of some kind. That meditation typically is used to touch upon experientially, which is a kind of an analogy system at work there, as all human perception is assigned to Sagittarius, which symbolizes reality of some kind or another. So Cancer is up there in what you might call cosmic etheric considerations. The cosmic ether is established in Cancer, and it's it's like just beyond the edge of human perception, so that nature can exist within this ether perspective, right? And same as Leo, it's just at the edge of and beyond human experience. Gemini is completely unavailable, Taurus is completely unavailable, and Aries is completely unavailable. Though we use symbols to try and get at, those ideas conceptually, to ground them in practical terms as much as possible. It's just that with Aries, these practical terms tend to take on a sinister quality. And the ideas, if they're not sinister, might be assigned to something like Aquarius, or if they are sinister, then Capricorn, or maybe a mixture of both, in which case you're talking about Pisces high, or solute perspective, right? Sneaking around in the outer darkness perspective, you might say, and observing from solute perspective into a reality. These cards touch upon observations taking place directed both inwardly and outwardly Chariot, it's what you might call a prepper's card, or a prepping card, because you're totally prepped for travel to include the ability to move your entire household along, right? Caravan fashion even. The Spartans of ancient Greece used to rely on their red capes as a shelter quite a bit in the field. Lived a particularly Spartan existence together, in militaristic terms. And this card touches on that quite a bit. The idea of home, shelter, and related trust shared in the sense that, the Spartans have each other's back, as it were. And you got the earth symbolic wheels, universe symbolic wheels even. Galaxy symbolic wheels placed in the card as the mechanism upon which one moves in a baseline sense, right? Another concept assigned to Cancer is that of care. Care is taken. Care is made use of in prepping. One's household is completely prepared. One maintains a stock of food, water, amenities, books, whatever, clothing, required not only for, existence within the household, but outside of the household in conducting work in the world, to include that which would be involved in distant travel. One maintains a complete household in, what you might call an archetypally universal sense. One meditates upon this, same as one, can meditate upon one's own body, because your own body is like a house, right? Symbolized by the armor, the suit of armor in this card, which is made analogous to the crab at the top there, as symbolic of, Cancer, or maintaining one's house that can move along as one moves, the house moves as the creature moves, right? That's an analogy system all its own. And the two claws are Leo, the lion symbols, right? Like two guardian lions outside a front door. And the lions conduct magic with other people in a social sense of the word. It's where you get consideration of Adler's individual psychology, right? All the Neo-Freudian and Freudian perspectives are derived pretty largely from the secretary of alchemy. So, Freud was steeped in quite a great deal of ancient knowledge. And he knew to, in my opinion, appeal to British authorities in the intelligence fields, right? Secretly so, too, and get away with it. Eventually move his entire operation into Great Britain about the time he was, about ready to die and leave everything to his daughter, Anna. But this canopy over the chariot symbolizes shelter provided from social connections, right? It takes a reservoir-like form in this card. It takes on the coloration of blue in various shades, from light blue, daylight, to darker blue, nighttime. And the effect is that the colors combined into almost a royal blue, which you would associate with banking. Got a certain amount of monetary flow going into the household, right? Through the four pillars there. The fourth sign, the copper pillars. In ancient Greek tradition, pillars were often painted red to symbolize the same kind of passion that's in this chariot of fire symbolism here, with the red painted chariot symbolizing the passions of Leo, and how the fire element is expressed in that sign as a situational perspective. That's why I associate this with Leo, is because these wagon wheels and the cape interface with situation, which can be very harsh, right? So the passions are part of what keep you alive, and stoicism is very much a part of the symbolism of this card, especially. Staying focused on the body even under harsh circumstances, and maintaining tempered composure in the face of things that you might be able to control or maybe have no control over. The philosophy of Stoicism discussing that quite a great deal. In my opinion, the ancient Greek take on it being vastly superior to that of the Roman take, simply due to the fact that the Romans filtered things to suit the empire. probably more than the philosophers of Athens did, right? Ancient Athens. So you could construe these pillars as effectively painted red, but they're actually copper colored, which symbolizes Venus, emotion, right? So the reservoir up top of the card coming out of Gemini begins to flow down into these copper pillars, right? Symbolizing the flow of emotion, tempered emotion, strong emotion, right? Thus Leo. The pillars are strong. Societal pillars, you might say. So you have the support of the community in maintaining your household out of Gemini consideration, which is infinite in scale, or at least, if not infinite, then unknown as far as quantification is concerned, right? There's a magic being performed here, abracadabra, in the form of this little bowl shape in the lap of the knight. And there are various takes on knowing all, but the sensation aspect leans in the direction of Aries, whereas the knowledge aspect, the experience aspect, leans in the direction of Gemini, as far as knowing all is concerned, right? Taurus touches upon both Gemini and Aries as an infinite distant point, geometric take consideration-wise on those subjects. If Aries is the singularity, then Taurus is a singularity, of which there is an infinite multitude coming and going at all times, right? And in all times. This backdrop in the background symbolizes manifestation on a universal scale from out of the white light of Gemini into a banker blue take on the subject overall till it kind of forms into a shell. So the universe is like a shelter for us, right? That came into being. And so we emulate that in maintaining our households in life. And you're making as above, so below here and conducting your magic. So these sparkling diamonds are being brought into reality more and more through practices of some kind. And Cancer level practices are what you call baseline practices, right? You want your entire suit of armor somehow or another to be sparkling, as they say, right? But this armor touches upon this bowl held central, and there's a little green kind of towards the back that would symbolize Taurus, or maybe Libra. Green I've seen associated with both of those astrological signs. These are deliberate practices that are being expressed in these cards, though. Not haphazardly stumbled into practices by a long shot, right? There's nothing haphazard about these two cards, these two trump cards. And the four animals down there at the bottom that are all mixed up together represent the fixed signs along the right side of the secret tree of alchemy, anatomical positionally speaking. The being mixed up together symbolizes Capricorn. These creatures are in the process of taking on discipline here, and this discipline symbolizes being brought to heel. They're practicing being at heel, as it were, like a properly conditioned dog, which is also a Capricorn symbol. This is a particularly still card. There's very little in the way of implied motion in this card, except there is emotion associated with any implied motion in this card, right? Symbolizing Libra, which is a kind of movement. For example, electrical current is one Libra analogy. Emotional flow is another one. Stream of consciousness is contributed to from out of a Libra perspective too. Abracadabra up there on the top, symbolizing a stream of consciousness of a kind being maintained from out of a group perspective into a set perspective as far as, social groups are concerned. The four pillars symbolizing a set with a fifth pillar kind of in the center of it all, symbolizing a self-orientation in the form of an armored suit. This is where the focus of attention is being maintained. It's being maintained upon the entire body in a serene state that brings on tranquility or tranquilized state to a degree that can be considered productive for what one might call magical practice, right? Anything that brings on peak experience symbolized by the gold coloration or the brass coloration of the armor here, you can consider that to be magic, even in athletic terms. That's real magic. It's not the fanciful stuff that people go to watch stage magicians perform, right? Sometimes they use this symbolism, though, on the stage. So the gloves grasp the magic circle here in a manner similar to the way the crab is kind of grasping on abracadabra up there at the top, right? So this is a group working suggested up top, an individual working suggested down below, further below. We're getting into individual psychology here, which Alfred Adler took on from a Leo perspective in developing, right? Individual psychology, building strengths from out of weaknesses, which would be a Leo idea, right? Leo's very serious about strength and even lust under some circumstances, right? Lust being more appropriate to the night somehow, and strength being somehow more appropriate to the day. So you've got daylight hours decks and you've got nighttime decks. The Crowley deck, the Thoth Tarot, or the Tarot of the Egyptians, is a nighttime deck of cards. So eventually, Capricorn down here takes on a certain order that is a lot less mixed up, in the sense that already these creatures down on the bottom are behaving like stone lions, right? And Leo and Taurus are darker than the other two, okay? The heads indicating the signs assigned, the fixed astrological signs, the human head symbolizing Aquarius. Humans have very considerable capacity for making investment, which is an Aquarius idea, which touches base with the Cancer idea through the earth element, which is a self-orientation for both of those cards. And I believe water is also assigned to both of these cards traditionally. So there are linkages here, right, from a situational perspective. In the star, for example, the water is invested upon the universe in faith, an act of faith. An act of labor is always an act of faith, right? Something will be, returned for this investment later, hopefully in increased terms, in terms of flourishment or growth-related processes, producing a harvest or a yield of some kind, right? But here, the investment aspect takes on in time, a less laborious perspective of being meditatively tranquil in appropriate degree to that which is useful in conducting various kinds of magics. In this case, we're talking about a baseline level magic you would call care being maintained as a base orientation. The lessons of care are some of the most important lessons anyone can learn in life. They're kind of like in some versions of the Temperance, you symbolize care with one foot on the earth and the other foot in the water. That directly relates to both, I believe, Aquarius and this astrological sign, Cancer. You're maintaining care practices all the time in how you step or move about in life, right? And care is one of those words with so many definitions that relate to so many different situations, right? And some forms of care can be what one would call evil, in the sense, for example, that the care has somehow been weaponized or that care is somehow being abused. For example, one develops a care associated with drug acquisition when one becomes a drug addict. There are care practices associated with that, which don't necessarily properly care for the body or the brain, except in acquiring, drugs of addiction, right? That would be an example of what you call evil associated with the concept of care. But when you're trying to maintain health and social viability in life, care takes on what you would call good qualities, socially harmonious qualities, right? The only downside to that really is the fact that another concept out of Taurus and Gemini is intimately associated with all care practices, and this is the concept of truth. Sometimes caring for people involves being truthful with them. For example, one does not associate oneself organized criminally. Therefore, one does not associate with organized criminals, except maybe in the sense of them being brought into an interrogation room after, in the process of being prosecuted for a crime. One takes care not to associate in an organized criminal fashion of any kind, really. This includes maintaining codes of conduct that are too much like those of organized crime. Organized crime, for example, should always be reported to the people and their policing function that they maintain for themselves, right? This is something that organized crime despises for obvious reasons I won't get into in depth here. Care naturally is something you got to be careful with, right? Right? You care in a sense that keeps you continually prepared in life for practically anything, right? Which is symbolized very largely in the Chariot here, right? But this is a relatively stationary symbolism at work here. So it symbolizes meditation upon not only the household, in the sense that the household is completely stocked, cleaned, and prepped, right, for activities associated with household living, but also on the body. The body is cared for by various means, kept, glistening, as it were, and as though, brass has been cared for and copper has been cared for so that it shines, right? Without undue levels of oxidation becoming involved in that process. So the surfaces are cleaned regularly and appropriately so that they are long-lasting and, clean. Your body's clean, symbolized by the polished brass here. Your house is clean, symbolized by the polished copper here, right? You have a passion that you maintain along these lines. That passion can carry you out into the world to experience the harsh conditions that are out there, but your house typically is not maintained as a harsh condition of any kind. It's kept warm enough so that you can engage in productive activities in the household, to include studies, but it's not kept hot. It's not kept inefficiently warm. It's kept at an appropriate temperature for inside the house so that you can maintain that temperature all the time, right? Regardless of the season. Here, as far as meditation practices are concerned in the Chariot, the mental focus is upon the entire body at once. In the sense that you're basically maybe lying on your back or sitting in a position appropriate for meditation, like the ancient Egyptians would sit in a chair appropriate for the task. One can sit balanced and tempered in position and meditate. And one meditation that's part of human tradition is to meditate upon the entire body. It could be top to bottom, could be bottom up. I tend to prefer top to bottom simply because all the top muscles are closer to the brain, right? They're easier to access. You relax the face muscles, for example, and just sense the body. Sense its placement, even its orientation. You can imagine the room that your body's located in, right? Which is what is going on with this card right here. You're inside a room in this card. Everything is quiet, relatively speaking. You sense the entire body in a completely relaxed state while sensing through your imaginal faculties the room around you, maybe in the dark or the moonlight coming through the window or whatever. As a baseline practice for something like, astral projection, going out of body or going into lucid dreaming, along with other meditations that I practice that are more symbolized in the fortune card here, associated with building fortune. Part of the backdrop of the Chariot is the fortune directly behind the Chariot in the stack of cards assigned to Cancer, right? So you keep your body, as they say, sparkling, especially where it socially interfaces, right? In the military, you keep an extra clean t-shirt readily available, even in your training pack, along with a change of socks, right? Because under some circumstances, you might be in a meeting. You don't want anything distracting from the quality of that meeting because, it's a very important meeting typically associated with a military mission, right? So you put on a fresh t-shirt, freshen up a little bit before you go into this meeting, and things are just more focused on the task at hand. You can even change back out of that t-shirt later if you want to, or wash the other t-shirt if you have a chance. So that's a military orientation being presented in this card. Oh, at the very bottom of the chariot, you've got like a square grid pattern thing down there and kind of looks like almost like gold bars, right? That would symbolize Aries, the emperor, most specifically. It's golden, right? A golden presentation, just like the brass coloration of the armor plating up there above it. Capricorn tends to rise phallically out of Aries in the symbolism here. This position being maintained is very similar to that of the Emperor up in Aries, the Aries card. That and the Hanged Man being the only two cards assigned to Aries. And it's also very similar to what's going on in Pisces High with the Aeon or Judgment up there. Solute perspective maintained, which is very easy, Judgment is very easily expressed out of that perspective, right? And Crowley decided to emphasize the idea of the Aeon as though, emphasizing spiritual zeitgeist at hand, right? As soon as somebody is observing you from a solute perspective, they become zeitgeist from that perspective for you, right? Spiritual zeitgeist, which will manifest over time as reality zeitgeist, as in the technological age within which you live, symbolized pretty largely in this card here. They could be observing you completely unaware, in judgment of you, right? Illegal judgment even, if there's no due process warrant associated with this activity, right? Warrant of law. So this card expresses everything up the left side of the secret tree of alchemy. Okay, even the way the left glove blends in with the bowl here, right? The bowl is in purple, by the way, which is a color of temperance and also a color associated with a ritual practice. The bowl is filling full of something in a manner analogous to how the pictorial presentation here manifests out of a background, right? Which symbolizes Gemini movement in the background, which cannot be perceived directly, but you can get a sense of it through illumination coming out of Libra, right? So the same thing is going on inside the bowl that's going on inside the larger pictorially presented reality here. Anything you can perceive is, of course, Sagittarius. So all of these images in these cards are Sagittarius analogies, right? And what is he sitting on? Some kind of pad down there. Looks copper colored, same as the pillars. Okay, that makes him a pillar of society, same as these other pillars. The little infant animals you're raising up to become proper, healthy human beings symbolized down there at the bottom of the card, and they learn how to behave in the house. Over time, with patient practice, exemplified first and foremost by the parents, right? Infants have a natural tendency to pay attention to what the parents are doing, right? Practices. You'll notice, though, that the bowl shape there, it's full of passions, I guess you could say, automaticity even, skill, talent. The red coloration symbolizing the fire element. It's as though you got a fire burning in the pit of your gut or something like that. It's also vaginal symbolism. These symbols down the bottom of the card also symbolize faculties in a state of development. Your faculties as an individual that you develop at any time, at any given time, are analogous to developing talents or studies taken on as a discipline, right? You're reading books, studying books, taking notes, that whole 9 yards associated with academic studies, right? 9 yards symbolizing the ritual activity, the bowl. These things all interrelate together in this imagery in a holographic analogous fashion. You're looking at holographic considerations of analogy at work, right? And they kind of intermingle together in the ego here, symbolized by the armor and other imagery that relate ego development ideas. A healthy, strong ego that can move, therefore it's flexible, but it's also strong. It's appropriately adapted to prevailing situation in life, to include as the situation tends to change over time, taking into account that things also probably more often tend to stay the same. So not rigidly same in the sense of being in a state of stasis, which is in reality only a relative stasis. It was symbolized by Capricorn, right? Pure stasis symbolized by Aries beneath Capricorn, right? As part of a whole other dimension compared with your reality that you experience. Effectively, Aries is completely outside the dimension, because if it weren't, the dimension would disintegrate through a Capricorn-like process into nothing. Go through some manner of putrefaction, probably maybe at the speed of light, who knows? Beyond the speed of light even. But the speed of light is something we associate with the very limit of human perception too, but on a functional level and a Libra level also, which is an energy level associated with movement. The reserve or the initiative of movement itself maintained within the universe. Electromagnetic radiation, X-rays, orgone, pulsation and flow, the energies of the body and the chakras and orgone biophysics, sexual energies of Tantra and what have you. That's all Libra. And everything's bright and glowing in this card. There's a lot of effort placed in that presentation of imagery here compared with the Fortune card over here, which is a little bit more cartoon-like, representing a state of relatively abstract consideration presented here, associated with studies, for example. So we got 4 faculties over here in the Chariot card undergoing development, and the 5th faculty up top there, right? That's fully developed and holistically maintained on an individual level, right? The ego, the body, the home, the trust that is maintained on a social scale with other people, but also on maybe something like a banking scale, as though the two considerations are analogous, right? There is a logic presented in each one of these trump cards, or what you might call an order of operations. So you're looking at a set here, a very well prepared set as a presentation, a chariot set, you might say, of a kind, properly maintained and held in, ownership of some kind in social relations with others that do similarly in their lives. So you're part of a social set here. You fit in with a group of people that are, abracadabra people, right? And you can invite them over to your house, and certain activities can take place there, and they can invite you over to their house, where the same kinds of activities can take place there. Social activities, ritual activities, whatever. Peak experiential activities, Virgo consideration. Virgo is where one experiences enlightenment, okay? In Cancer, you have unity as one of the analogies assigned there, right? And over in Leo, you've got strength as one of the analogies assigned there. these two things combine together to produce the experience of enlightenment, which is at the limit of human experience, but in a manner that you can experience it pretty clearly enough. It gets into the unclear. It seems to come out of the unclear, the unclarified, the uncrystallized take on experience and reality, right? It's a very emotional state. It's tranquil. There's trance associated with it typically to an appropriate degree that you might not even notice sometimes. Or it might be particularly noticeable, right? But it's appropriate to the activity and the individual involved in the activity because it's associated with genuine talent, either inherent talent or developed talent. They tend to be rather alike, although with inherent talent, you're talking about quite often evolved traits expressing themselves in the world, right? But that tends to blend in with developed talents too, because we have the evolved capability of developing quite an interesting range of talents in life, right? As people, as human beings. So we can get over, I guess, into fortune more now. So the perspective has changed as though it's changed directions, right? So in comparison with the Chariot here, it's as though fortune is some other kind of incarnation that is a little bit more cartoon-like in consideration, right? The same way ideas that you're working with in your mind can be kind of like that. Quite often, when you're studying somebody's book, for example, that they've written, the Sphinx up here on top of the wheel, which corresponds with the Knight in the face card Chariot, sitting on top of the world. He's got his paws up there, holding a sword up in the air, symbolizing the element of air or mental focus. The point of the sword is right in front of the eyes, and it forms into like a spark of creation, star-like, right? Various different expressions of stardom all up in here. Different numbers of points, right? Points of focus, right? You've read a good number of books. You hang out with well-read people. The top of the card emphasizes Gemini analogy, right? But also Taurus. It's sparkling up there with the divine spark, which seats itself in the brain. And, holographic analogy and the pineal gland, according to, many traditions. But, the paws of the lion or the Sphinx are the same as the crab in the Chariot, right? And the Knight in Chariot, right? There's a ritual activity taking place. In this case, we're probably looking at somebody reading or studying a book or meditating on an infinite distant point, a divine spark, which cannot be perceived in reality, but can be symbolized by a point, a red point, a black point, the point of something pointed, like an obelisk even. The sword can be construed as obelisk symbolism, but obelisks have been used in a manner similar to how stone lions have been used, right? To quote-unquote guard the entrances to temple complexes and what have you. And a temple complex, of course, is a collection of temples or temple-related artifacts. Ancient Egypt being really big on that particular subject, right? All that limestone and granite and what have you. And we got some faculties climbing the wagon wheel here as though it's a ladder. Those are developing faculties, so he's probably studying on a couple of subjects out of books while at home. In the Chariot, we've got 4 faculties developing down there, symbolizing the fixed signs, trying to get it together, right? To the point where you've got a reality explication implied there, right? You're trying to explicate a reality into your life. Part of doing that involves reading books, and here it looks like he's reading on 2 subjects, right? And these faculties are trying to develop or get on top of the wagon wheel, same as the Sphinx. In doing so, they become part of the Sphinx expression, which, raises us head up high and finds expression in the daylight world outside the house as a presentation. But here the Sphinx is reading the presentations of other people, symbolized by, Gemini considerations up there at the top. As above, so below, And you're tempered in this because you don't necessarily believe everything you read, right? But you can hold judgment, temperance-wise, till you finish the book. Maybe taking down notes that are critical in nature, systematic. You critique the work, maybe ongoing, maybe after the fact, maybe in producing a summary expression relating to the work. An annotated bibliography, for example. Maybe, you're trying to organize ideas to write your own book, right? So you got to properly cite your sources if you want to be published in, for example, the academic world. Here we got some yellow and golden coloration going on there. One is becoming golden, becoming talented together, developing peak experience together, because the yellow and gold's rather pale, right? The presentation card here is brassy, bright goldy colored, implying, secreted away there's a stash of gold in Aries or something like that, or a dark room somewhere. In the Chariot, that's a presentation you maintain in the world. Fortune symbolizes the build-up to that presentation, right? You're building fortune. All this purple in the card, as above, so below, expressed here, symbolizing ritual activity of tempered nature. Now, in tempering, one mixes blue in with the red. So one tempers the emotional reactivity inclinations one maybe maintains in life, so that they don't ruin the work at hand, right? You can remain calm and both reasonable and sensible in your expression of logic and in your interfacing with, the orders of operations associated with that logic, maybe as expressed by others, okay? So when one is tempered, one is more intelligent, and one's activities are more intelligent. One avoids getting caught up in undue expressions of passion that are not fully appropriate to a situation. In human terms, it's pretty rare for fight or flight to be appropriate to a situation, though it can happen, and you hope that situation operates properly when it does, right? But in human society, in civilization, fight or flight tends to get bound up into what is known as stress, and we experience in daily life what are known as stressors, which bring on the experience of stress to a degree, but certainly the manifestation of stress. And this has a detrimental effect on the body over time, and cortisol production and what have you, tearing the body down basically over time. So if one can maintain oneself sensibly and reasonably tempered, one is more likely to maintain one's health over time and, generally speaking, or function in more appropriate terms in life. That's what the purple is all about here. One is seriously, relaxing. You're talking about parasympathetic, nervous response, pretty much awash in the situation. In the house, you're relaxed, right? It's a safe space. It's a place to be safe and reflect, spend quality time reflecting. There isn't too much to consider on a hasty assessment level, right? Compared with out in the world out there walking the streets, right? One might have to make comparatively hasty assessments of situations to avoid dangers and what have you. But in your house, things should be safe, right? Upon arriving at home, for example, you might do a security check, because hostile forces are on the rise in the world. They might be waiting for you to arrive home out in the yard, as One can get a sense was the case with the murder that involved the Manson family. The second murder, where according to some accounts, Charles Manson was just out in the darkness of the backyard waiting for a certain person to walk out into the yard to begin the process of taking the entire family captive, right? The LaBiancas. So that he was waiting for somebody like Mrs. LaBianca to walk out into the yard. Big mistake. But that's just one take on that subject. Likely true. It strikes me as being true, but it's a lot more plausible than they, stumbled up across the front yard and was lurking around the house, right? If Charles Manson went in to capture everybody, things were planned a little more intelligently. The household was not secure. Okay, the LaBiancas were involved in their activities of an evening household nature, unaware that they were in danger. Somebody waiting in the yard in the back of the house. Charles Manson himself takes Mrs. LaBianca captive, takes her into the house, takes the husband captive. He's already got a hostage going into the house, right? Ties them both up, and then the rest of the family can go stumbling across the yard to enter the house, right? So a home is a safe space. It's where you feel safe. You spend your time involved developing faculties that you will take out into the world. Part of that can involve reading on a couple of books every night. Maybe one's a math book. Maybe the other one's a book on psychology. That's what you're studying at that point in your life, right? And, you put in a solid 90-minute study session on each. Or maybe you can only study one book on a particular night because you have guests over. Or maybe, on that night you're not studying at all because, you're very much involved with social activities, right? But when you're by yourself in your house, the books are always placed in the appropriate shrine or executive function area, right? Or desk, ready to deploy in immediate study. Wherever you left off, you can read the notes of your previous sessions for a little bit, get into about an hour and a half of solid study time, right? Focused, safe. And then put it all away. You might pick up the next book, if you have time available. And, after you take a break, doing some other activity that you enjoy doing, maybe on, a weekly basis, you'll just, allow your mind to be entertained with either going out to a movie or something that's on the television. But you temper that, you limit it to keep your faculties developing and disciplined, okay? You don't spend all your time just consuming entertainments, all right, which over time destroy faculties, okay, as those faculties atrophy and then disappear altogether. So we have, a fluidic motion going on here, which corresponds cross-referencing wise, symbolically speaking, with the activity going on in the background of the chariot, which is in its own way fluidic, but particularly illuminative, right? It's purple, lots of purple there, that's temperance, but then there's flowing like water being, from a sprinkler being, sprayed out in the yard, right? And it's like the investment out of Aquarius perspective as symbolized by the trump card titled The Star. It's an investment being made. In the background, you might say privately at the very least, if not secretly, you're making investments of your time. So in this case, we're talking about studies or meditations of one kind or another. Maybe for 20 minutes before bed, a focus is maintained on an infinite distant point, okay, which could be like a little black dot in the visionary field or on a card across the room. That has an effect, developmentally speaking, especially after you've done something like study in a book, those little black words written in the pages. Then in the end, you study a little black point, like a little period point, for a period of time you deem to be appropriate. And then you go to bed and you do the bedtime ritual where you focus on the body, like in the chariot, where the focus is on the entire body and the room around the body, right? But that's not what you're doing with the fortune here. In the fortune, you are reading a book, watching an instructional video, maybe having a conversation with somebody you know, socializing appropriately, maybe with your own children, socializing, spending quality time with them. While exemplifying for your children as the primary lessons taught in life to children, especially young children, as your example. Okay, you want disciplined children, you practice discipline yourself. They see you practicing discipline, like reading a book. They start to develop interests along those lines. And you can even provide them appropriate reading material. If they're particularly young, then it's picture books, maybe with words that you can read to them so that they know there's a process to looking at those words, and then ideas come to your mind that you relate verbally. They're not doing the thing where they spend their time vegetating in front of the TV room, like in Girl Interrupted. The same goes on in living rooms all over the United States and elsewhere on the planet. You know, people just sit and watch TV, and their brains are in the process of atrophying on very many levels, right? Working with logic, for example, is one level. The brain atrophies over time from watching television. So you got the star there. Now these little sparkling star points of light in the sky, even our sun, symbolize takes on the whole idea of divine spark or creation on a particularly primordial level of consideration that's particularly geometric, as in it comes to a point, right? It's right in the center of the wagon wheel here, just like that spot of red in the center of the bowl, which becomes rather like a solar disk, right? Symbolism at work in the chariot. Well, it's the same disk at work here, consideration-wise. Now, this change of perspective from the front perspective, as seen in the chariot, to the side profile perspective, as seen in fortune, symbolizes the concept of reincarnation. Okay, one lives a whole different life in the house compared with what one presents to the world. Okay, outside the house. So you do things in private in the house, as though it's a whole other lifetime you're experiencing, right? You can forget the outside world for a little while when you're inside the house. And when you're outside the house, you can, to a degree, forget the house. If you live in a society of trust, in a community of trust, neighborhood-wise, you could probably, under, ideal circumstances of trust, leave your doors unlocked at night. Sometimes in the past, people left them unlocked all the time and just went to work and came back and forth without a worry, right? This would, reveal to you that organized crime does not hold sway in the community. This living in trust. Okay, that's why people value it so much. They probably don't even realize why anymore, but that's really why. So what you study at home is part of that trust. Okay, the best way to maintain genuine trust is to be after the genuine truth. Not as the cult would impose it upon you, but as you would access in your own mind. By developing your mind, developing your capacity for free thinking, for example. Humans have a nature that thinks freely along certain lines of social trust and forthright expression in the world. All this free information floating around, being mostly true, is an expression of trust shared amongst intelligent people who can reason effectively, who can work with logic, but in doing so, they are after solutions to problems, genuine truths that they can express to themselves at first in absolute terms and then express to others the same way, and have others pretty easily relate to what is being said. We live in a world today where, because of television, right, people demand more what they call proof for everything, where everything you say has gotta be thoroughly contextually expressed down to the last detail of context and everything. And you could spend hours doing this and it'll never be enough for them because they don't do their own thinking. They've been watching television. So if you're going to express things down to the nth detail as far as proof is concerned, you're either involved in mathematical proof in abstract terms of logic, systematic logic, self-contained typically, okay, or you're involved in scientific proofs published, right, to fully adequate detail, to the point where other people could replicate your efforts in producing their own experiments, but in so doing, they need to verify your experiment, which science is expensive, by the way, compared with philosophy. But good philosophy doesn't have to be cheap-ass philosophy, right? Even though philosophy is comparatively cheap. In ancient Greece, there's a tradition of people conducting effective philosophy, supposedly, while homeless out on the street, living out of a clay pot. Science typically isn't like that. Okay, it's expensive. The education associated with it is appropriately expensive to an effective degree. Strengths and weaknesses associated with, right? Then there's the publishing issue, right? Getting things properly published to, communicate to a community of scientists effectively. So you might be studying science and philosophy here with fortune. And psychology happens to be a superb way of approaching both of those issues. Psychology has been one of the most fruitful studies I've undertaken in my own life so far. Every take, on psychology has its value. That's the reason, right? There has to be value there, or else people won't seek the information out. But there's also the tendency to isolate the various disciplines of psychology to the detriment of not only an individual take on psychology, but the psychological fields as a whole, right? And there are publishing efforts, ongoing, especially recently, designed to effectively meld all the disciplines of psychology together into an effective psychology, but people get into politics here, and they like to throw the baby out with the bathwater in doing so. So we get into emotional reactivity, which temperance comes to bear upon solution-wise, okay? You're bringing the solution of the blue in contact with the emotional reactivity fires of red to make purple, which is warm coloration, comparatively speaking. It doesn't have to be lukewarm in the sense of, talked about in the Bible or whatever. It's just tempered disposition, useful in conducting reasoning, right? And working with logic systematically and patiently towards either a goal or a solution to a problem, or maybe obtaining something in life on an acquisitional level. These are all destinational analogies that you're after through your logic working, right? That's magic at work. Once it becomes peak experiential, as symbolized by the Sphinx up here on top of the world, well, that's magic, okay? The experience of magic, it's a tranquil experience. It's a euphoric experience even, depending on what it is you're doing. But such things can be short-circuited through the development of compulsions, which you could think of as bubble reality orientations, some of which are particularly bizarre, like becoming a compulsive arsonist, for example. You're arsoning old buildings or whatever by the time you're seriously developed along that line of compulsion development, right? There's a euphoria associated with it, as though you've accomplished something in life, though you have not, really. It's a substitute of sublimative nature associated with neurosis development. There's some kind of a natural expression that wants to express itself, but simply cannot. It's of social-oriented nature initially, as the id, becoming a cathexis, which is then counter-cathexized and developing a conflict and related ambivalence, okay? Experienced quite often as a pressure in life or stress. Sometimes you experience the anxiety of it even at different times, depending on the circumstances and the activities, right? But for whatever reason, you can't even express a direct, enraged expression associated with this id. So it sublimates into another activity of compulsive nature due to the compulsory circumstances of an unnatural nature under which you live, right? Associated, for example, with compulsory religious cults or even destructive religious cults. It becomes over time a personality disorder expression of some kind of antisocial nature. Rather than being socially inclined or truthfully inclined, it becomes anti-socially inclined. Or it's kind of a lie. The truth in it being specifically hostile on a social level. But when you actually do the thing with starting the fire, you get a certain gratification out of it that you call peak experiential of a chronically sublimated nature, right? You can maybe even experience kind of a satisfying euphoria from watching what you have produced, right? In life, which is basically a big bonfire, which might hurt people financially, physically, emotionally. So it's antisocial in nature. But this spark, this divine spark at the center of the wheel is also inside of a triangle shape. There are rays coming up into form this triangle, right? A divine spark produces a universal expression of shape, which is the simple geometric shapes like circles, triangles. The divine spark is Taurus, though. It touches upon pure oblivion itself. But a triangle is kind of a Cancer symbol. A cube even is a Cancer symbol or a square. But here's the thing, right? These different shapes emphasize different other astrological signs, like a cube and a square. Can also symbolize Aries. If you consider the lines to be perfectly straight. And you also consider the idea that no line in nature is perfectly straight. Real lines have at least the slightest curvature associated with them, right? Or the slightest imperfection. Triangle would emphasize Gemini along with Cancer. It's still a stable kind of shape. It holds a kind of stability. Circle, more emphasizing of Cancer, or a cube or an egg shape, right? Now you get into the egg shape and you're getting back into Gemini again, right? These are universal kinds of takes upon different ideas. The circle, most ideally expressing Cancer analogy, right? Thus it's in the face card, but it's also in this fortune card in the background, the circle, the wagon wheel, the earth, sphere, spinning, investing on a currency level, you might say, or water elemental level, like out of Aquarius in the form of the star, making laborious investments. Something golden is going to develop out of it in time. Now, the sky blue considerations up here on the top, that symbolizes looking into other people's presentations in the world or daylight appearances. When you publish a book, you're putting your best foot forward in book form, right? Secretive stuff is kept out of the book. Thus, the nighttime is kept out of the book. Now, in relation to Gemini, the daylight symbolizes the air element of Gemini's situation during the day. The sky, Gemini symbolic largely. During the day, it turns blue with white clouds or dark clouds or whatever. Shadowy clouds or puffy white clouds. Shadowy symbolizing more Capricorn, the possibility or likelihood of some manner of storm, or maybe there's a fire nearby, who knows. Volcanic eruption even, but the dark sky with the stars in it symbolizes Gemini too on a situational level, therefore an air elemental level, same as the daylight coloration of blue and white. But it's nighttime. and the stars are visible. Okay. That's when people get together socially. You could wind up, socially interacting with practically anybody at a given party, right? It's a Gemini consideration. You don't know how many people are there. The place is packed. Wow. This isn't exactly a set here, like when you go to a meeting at a club, right? To conduct ritual or whatever. Typically that's expressive more of a set, a Cancer consideration, a finite group of people that you even have rostered. So, as I stated before, the mathematical concept of the set is at work here. So, in fortune here, you probably got a library in a room somewhere full of books. Part of your fortune, right? Sets are, of course, important in functional considerations in mathematics and conducting a certain style of equation expression. Equations, the concept of equations being assigned to Sagittarius, where all experience of reality itself, or on an inner or an outer orientation, are considered in Sagittarius, right? You experience things in Sagittarius. Perception, for example, is assigned to Sagittarius. And you got these gold-colored lightning bolts coming up out of the ground. That indicates storm activity down south, which is Aries, Capricorn consideration. But the lightning bolts themselves are Libra consideration. So it could be storming outside along with your investments are initially, at the very least, stormy or conflicted because you're confused about things, right? Maybe even emotionally reactive as a result, but you're tempering all that through your activity, right? Your study activity is calm and focused and meditative. Increasing the efficiency of your learning involves developing the capacity to be exclusively focused upon the subject matter, right? For an extended period of time. They design Hollywood movies around this concept where you should be able to maintain focus pretty much continually for about an hour and a half, no problem. Because you can do it easily in a movie theater, right? As long as there's nothing distracting you. Same goes for studying. You should, if you're truly, developed in your discipline, be able to stay focused on a given subject study-wise for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, sometimes even longer if you're particularly enthusiastic, right? Enthusiasm being very important too. If you can focus on something exclusively and not be disturbed, you're learning efficiently. But the emotional factor increases the efficiency, which is where you're getting into magic. The experience of, peak experience, right? The experience of peak nature. There's a certain amount of appropriately applied focus and related trance associated with this that you could call fascination. You develop a capacity for fascination studying practically anything you're looking at in a book, for example. And you increase your efficiency of learning out of that book. Your enthusiasm increases your efficiency of learning. These faculties that are trying to learn here, the Sphinx is fully developed in some fashion or another as a faculty. It's a pillar of society symbolized by that sword. Held up, it keeps the wheel, Cancer, connected to Gemini, which is like the magic mirror, right? There's a magic mirror inside the bowl held in the lap by the knight in the chariot. This is also a magic mirror. Gemini kind of implied in the background as though, there's something particularly well-tempered, focused upon. That star in the center symbolizes what the Sphinx is focusing on while on top of that wheel. So the wheel can be likened to a book or some other focus that is being studied systematically, right? Because whenever you're studying something, you're formulating you're enlarging your mind map. With care, of course, selectively, critically, right? Bias tends to be brought to bear on these subjects, these considerations. Unfortunately, bias is one of those things that could take on Capricorn scale. Ambivalence and conflict in becoming chronic. A chronic bias of some kind or another, confirmation bias, inclinations, for example, due to emotionally reactive inclinations, right? The people that make the most popular videos on a video platform tend to be the ones that pretty much express what everybody else wants to hear. Biases at work, right? Trying to get to the real truth isn't as popular. So breadth of study tends to be a platform for deep dive. If you think of deep dive as the chariot here, and fortune then is something engaged in to produce that deep dive presentation, right? You're on a platform. There's a breadth of study involved with that. But the deep dive still has to take place. That typically involves going from deductive thinking into inductive thinking, where creative thinking of your own starts to take place and you start to formulate a vision of some kind, of some truthful kind that you can then express. And express it fully appropriately to the world, where this is my take on this situation versus this is what I've drawn from these other sources deductively. Okay? So there's a certain amount of creation involved with, combining deductive and inductive thinking together, cyclically going back and forth like a pendulum, used in hypnosis sometimes, right? With a certain rhythm associated with it. Bringing on the music of the spheres, right? Where you start to become entranced. You start to become hypnotized. But you want your hypnosis to be focused on some truth rather than some bias of Capricorn scale, because beliefs can tranquilize people untruthfully, as can attitudes. And these are chronic beliefs and attitudes associated with, for example, with organized cultism. You start to take on beliefs that are untrue, but you're required to because you're part of an organization, part of a set of cultic scope, right? This is systematically detrimental in putting you in a place probably inferior to your true human potential, but within what you perceive to be the safety of a cult, right? You're put within a rank and file that way, which tends to be detrimental to most members of the cult, except for the people that are in the inner circle of the cult, who draw financial benefits from being in the cult. Whereas other people, most of the people in a cult of destructive scope, only make investments and get very little in return, other than, a certain sense of safety for a time, right? So you want to be after the truth when you're practicing anything temperanced in life, or intelligent, okay? When you're genuinely intelligent, you're interfacing with genuine truth, and not as necessarily as would be imposed upon you by others. So you have, if you're genuinely truthful, you're going to be going against the grain or swimming cross current a good amount of time. Hopefully not to the point where, they're going to try and drown you or kill you, right? Or otherwise be destructive to you. So emotional reactivity makes people like that. And people of destructive cultic disposition figure out how to profiteer related to this. So you got cult leaders all over, YouTube right now. They're making the bucks, spreading disinformation. Truths mixed with lies and obfuscations and distractions, red herrings, whatever. Straw man arguments, shot back at people, the whole 9 yards along those lines. And it's popular activity. So that gives you some idea of the state of people, right, as a whole. How much do they really live in trust with each other? Not as much as you would hope, in my view. But you can detect a certain, shall we say, narcissistic pride in these people, too, and their presentations. If one is seriously intelligent, one also detects that in oneself and learns to temper it, to reduce its scope of function in your life over time. By, once you realize it's there, you remain sensitive to it, okay? And then Every time it rears its head, you temper it down. You don't deny it. Okay, that would just repress it, right? You simply temper it, reduce its expression so it's out of the way and you can continue to think clearly and productively and usefully. It's almost like a crystal ball right up there at the top that he's looking into, right? The Sphinx. He's looking into the magic mirror of Gemini. Looking into the infinite, you might say, by looking at a point or looking at some written words that somebody else wrote. And then you have imaginal activities taking place in your mind, which, if the book is well written and genuinely useful, will bring up genuine and useful logics in the mind. Orders of operations, right? Considered on a variety of levels, linguistically, imaginally, organizationally, orientation-wise, right? As far as placement of ideas is concerned relative to other ideas. You're basically mapping things out in your mind, maybe practicing things out with written notes and homework assignment type problem solution exercises, related to change yourself more usefully for the better over time and be in a position to socially interact with more people on a productive level of, various different kinds. We got in this splashing about here around the wagon wheel, we got the daylight colors of, white clouds and blue sky in there. So these are presentable ideas that are being worked with here, right? You're working on things that you would be perfectly comfortable presenting to the world to make yourself better on that scale. The whole idea of lust is mixed up with that of stress, right? When Leo is stressed somehow, it becomes lustful. Lust can take on such an intensity it's associated with the onset of death. It's almost like a putrefaction that once it develops enough, momentum of Capricorn scope that can bring down the lion towards its death, right? Towards its removal from the world by, violence or starvation or something like that. And related violence typically in the wild kingdom, as it's termed. So this is an intelligent animal up on top of the tree there. And you got intelligence developing into these animal figures down on the wagon wheel over time, though they're more, they're at an introductory level of development compared with the Sphinx up here on top. But I guess you can maintain typically in life a couple of disciplines of intellectual scope, right? On top of the disciplines maintained in the household presented to the world, which are like, they show 4 down there at the bottom. So maybe you got family to take care of and you got work to take care of outside the house. Bringing home the bread and butter, so to speak, considerations on top of academic considerations. Chariot, we're looking at faculties probably associated with the household, bringing your house to order, right? Clean, ordered household. Fortune, clean, healthy, ordered considerations taken on as disciplines in life. If you spend your time watching television, you are effectively demoting yourself on this level. Okay, you're making yourself inferior over time. If you are engaged in academic studies or other similar studies, you probably are making yourself more superior over time in an Adlerian sense of the word, making yourself superior rather than inferior, right? In his individual psychology, so... Yeah, the storm is down there at the bottom of the card. You notice these lightning bolts are the same color as the gold bricks down there at the bottom of Chariot, right? Things are calm in the Chariot. Things are a lot more torrid, though, in Fortune, where you're developing faculties other than just, calm serenity for yourself. A tendency, maybe when you first get home, from work or whatever when you get back to the house is to enjoy the ordered presentation your house presents to you as you walk in the door, and then just sit down and relax for a few minutes, maybe talk for a little bit, socially interact at the same time, right? That's a natural order of things in life for a lot of people, probably most people. But when you get into, you've just left the world that emphasizes sympathetic nervous response, probably a bit much, into a world that emphasizes parasympathetic nervous response. So you relax. You maybe talk, converse for a while. If you're into music, you pick up a musical instrument and sit down and relax with that for a little while. I found that to be absolutely fabulous upon arriving home after work. Getting into, making, divine sounding music or whatever that is to you exactly. Fender Stratocaster or piano or whatever. And that's when, sometimes disciplines are pushed too harshly on the kids to get them to play their piano lessons when they get home, right? You're pushing it too hard. They don't see the value of it along these lines that I'm discussing right now. But you're bringing storminess out of the serenity established, right? And conducting your household activities in the evening time, maybe after dinner. Typically, that's homework time, right? Going to school. And again, that's an idea that's pushed rather harshly, but really, it's to be valued. It's a natural inclination that people have. Study a couple of subjects, in socially interacting with people or whatever, going about your household routine in the evening, towards bedtime, towards midnight, right? So the lightning bolts come up. That symbolizes Libra interacting with Capricorn, okay? In conjunction with all this purple symbolic temperance and the daylight hours coloration and those swirls, right? You're working with really good ideas, clear ideas, daylight clear ideas, not murky ideas, like in nighttime, shadowy ideation. As much as it can be really enjoyable to be out at night, it can also be dangerous, right? You don't see as clearly at night. Simian creatures like to get up into the trees to be at home, so to speak, and relatively safe, hoping their numbers will remain into the morning hours, right? So these, the lightning bolts symbolize emotional reactivity, typically. For example, the SS lightning bolts, so the Nazi SS, symbolizes emotional reactivity, okay, being deliberately fostered in the German people through this organization of, relative death, but also intelligence function, right? So the lightning bolts don't have to be a bad symbol. Like here, it's associated with studies. Okay, you're contending with the fact that you're confused on a subject. Okay, and you're going to have to spend quality time alleviating the stress associated with that confusion, especially because stress gets in the way of so much, doesn't it? You have bad dreams about stress, especially relating to school, especially if you got vampires out of body around you in your bed, dropping their toxins into you. That'll bring on typically this kind of stressful dream, being at school and you don't have your textbook, you don't know where to get your textbook. In fact, you need a list of all your classes and all the scheduled times. Where's that? Where do I get that? Where's the office? Where do I, just one thing right after another. And next thing you know, you realize you're only half dressed for school or what. Those kinds of dreams, right? You're trying to contend with that kind of reality in your evening practice of doing homework, right? So you're contending with emotional reaction and engaging in these meditative practices that over time build for you fortune. But the frame up is the Sagittarius analogy, right? You frame something, you're presenting something. So nature presents you with a reality. Your mind presents you with imaginings as you let your mind free associate in a Freudian sense, right? And these things are all open to interpretations of various kinds, analyses, Assessments, depending on how quick the thinking needs to be in a given situation. Typically at home, safe space. Assessments de-emphasized. Detailed analyses and reflections emphasized, right? So this is developmental time, after dinner time, even the before dinner time, right? Touching base with family members when you get home and throughout the evening, socially, and maybe with guests over. That's an important developmental consideration here too, right? These are socially oriented cards, okay? Yeah, the expression of numbers in these frames, these are mathematical orientations in my view. They can be either or, astrological or mathematical. Mathematical considerations are more mundane considerations associated with practical logics of some kind or another. We have the system of mathematics to express these ideas in relatively abstract terms of a compact symbolic scope to make the logic immediately obvious and subject to analysis, right? And disciplined practices, right? But it just so happens mathematics grounds itself into practical reality through accurate measurements available through scientifically oriented means, right? Science itself, engineering, statistical analyses, etc., etc. So there's the value take on mathematics that is purely systematic within its self-contained system, where all kinds of philosophical ideas come to bear there too, right? Born out of the Catholic scholastic orientation developed in Western civilization out of Aristotle through the Enlightenment and the philosophers of Europe. Mathematics, especially out of France and England. Other types of philosophical considerations coming out of Germany, which I'm kind of sorting through now. Germany's kind of a controversial subject along these lines, it seems, of late. So something hidden on the bottom of the frame there in fortune, that would be Aries. Something rises out phallically from that direction. That's Capricorn consideration, but it's lightning bolts, so it's Libra. Intensified emotional considerations of a build-up scope, you might say, where a charge has been built up of static nature. Capricorn and Libra interacting with a particular intensity, sparking intensity, right? But that's being tempered, same as the studied situation here, right? Integral with, you're reducing your emotional reactivity to fully appropriate response in prevailing scale, okay? Over time, spent, in studies. These two cards are particularly stoic in an ancient Grecian sense, okay? If you think of the Roman take on Stoicism, of Epictetus, I believe his name was, who was associated with the court, the royal family situation of Nero, okay? If you think of that as the Roman style face card, right, of Stoicism as a philosophical discipline, right? These two cards capture a particularly Grecian take on Stoicism, where much literature was lost, largely dealing with issues that I've expressed here regarding the practice of temperance. There's a practice of temperance associated with, generalized care orientation that you'd call Cancer. And then there's the practice of temperance associated with specific disciplines. Now, generalized care is expressed here in the Chariot quite a bit in association with the maintenance of the household and the presentations to the world, right? Yeah, the more ritualistic on an individual discipline level, okay, we go from generalized discipline into more specific discipline in Fortune. When you're safe inside the house, you can be down in the basement working on your little project or whatever, right? And you're basically, you maintain the household that supports these activities. So hopefully you're maintaining safe activities, right? but also highly productive activities of specific scope where temperance also applies. So in the temperance versions of the tarot card Temperance, Sagittarius card, the feet practice generalized care and how you step about, right? 1 foot in the water, 1 foot on the earth, with the Pisces fish swimming down there in the form of yin-yang symbolism, right? Pisces high and Pisces low swim together in the secret tree of alchemy, kind of a deal. That's generalized care. You get a generalized mapping out of how to conduct oneself in everyday life in very general terms. But with specific disciplines, you've got specific orders of operations associated with those disciplines that are also practiced in temperance. Now, this practice of temperance is much associated with Stoicism as a philosophical orientation. They used to meet in ancient Greece and Athens on a porch with red pillars, right? That's the red of Leo passion that I've been talking about. So they understood what I'm expressing here, even back then in ancient Greece. The color purple being associated with the lore of Stoicism, right? Temperance lore coming out of the ocean, even. Shipwreck. There was a shipwreck out there, right? Same idea as a storm down here at the bottom of the fortune card. Or the gold that might be in the depths of the ocean in the chariot here, right? The gold bricks down there at the bottom. Yeah, that's like a shipwreck analogy. So these cards express ideas associated with Stoicism pretty readily. The ancient philosopher, the person that developed into Stoicism in ancient Greek times, who became really prominent in Stoic philosophy, literally swam ashore in Athens from a shipwreck full of like purple dye, which was lost at sea. That's symbolism. It might be true, it might not be true, but it's symbolic at the very least. So in Fortune, we have somebody swimming in purple, right? As though swimming ashore. He sees the shore off in the distance. He's swimming to Athens. And that's mixed up with the idea of studying in stoic fashion, tempered fashion. You can control what you can control, and if it's outside of your control, you still got your own individual system under appropriate control. And you know what you can control and what you can't control, and you conduct yourself appropriately relative to the situation, right? When bad things happen, you accept the fact. You don't deny the fact, right? As a matter of practice, temperance, right? And then you act appropriately from there. You discern what is appropriate, and then you act appropriately. If you look at the shapes that are used in the Chariot and in Fortune, the idea central to this is the idea of a complete shape or a complete figure, okay? So on the face card, the Chariot, the figure is complete as a circle, okay? This symbolizes a number of things, this figure or sign. It takes the shape of a bowl in Cancer, in the Chariot. And it symbolizes not only something like a magic circle, but also a social circle or a specific social circle to the point where it can be rostered on a list, which is kind of represents this social set, right? And related setting typical for this social set, right? Setting, of course, being the idea that's equivalent to an equation or a function, even better, okay, in mathematics. So, and this typical situation associated with this set is some kind of practice that they share together on a social level and on a practicing level, right? It could be a ritual activity associated with a temple location, home location, typical household arrangement for these people. But when we look at the trump card titled Fortune, there's a shape or a figure of geometric scope taking shape but is not complete yet. The confusion over the figure fully forming comes from below. This is where these lightning bolts are arising out of the bottom of the card in phallic fashion. Okay, it's a holographic analogous expression of an idea, right? That the confusion stems from something below, something that brings on emotional reactivity in people out of Libra, but it's the stasis associated with this is Capricorn, as manifest stasis or real stasis as experienced in reality. Aries is underneath Capricorn, as though a sunken treasure at sea, lost in the darkness. Though the real concept of that is a Pisces high concept. What Aries is pure oblivion, as far as we can tell, conceptually only. Capricorn is manifest stasis. For example, deadly orgone is a Capricorn analogy, but orgone is a Libra and Cancer consideration, depending on whether you're talking about a cosmic ether or orgone flow and pulsation down in Libra. But Libra can become highly reactive on an emotional level in response to some form or another of stasis. It could be characterological stasis associated with inner conflict, associated with ambivalent attitudes and orientations in the world, and loss of practice in life that results in ultimately depression, right? Which can result in death, to include death by suicide. This is somehow born out of Aries Capricorn. The number 10 is assigned to Capricorn on a spiritually empowered level as an astrological sign, but on a mundane level, it's assigned to Gemini, where the idea of intelligence networking is assigned. Also, the mathematical consideration of the concept of 10 being included in the secret tree of alchemy due to its associations with multiplication and the related mysteries thereof, right? It's synonymous effectively with the concept of mystery, which is Gemini, on a functional level at least. On an initiation level, Taurus. On an initiative level, Aries. Aries is inactive providence. Gemini is active providence. Taurus is the initiation associated with active providence, but touches upon inactive providence in Aries. Pure oblivion, the singularity of Aries, right? Symbolized by perfectly straight lines in Aries, and then you got the infinite distant point in Taurus symbolism. That's the unperceived point in the distance, right? That they toy around with in Fortune, right? Symbolically, rather indirectly, but with divine spark symbolism considered in holographic analogy, solar symbolism, star symbolism, point of a sword in Fortune, implying a point. If you're looking at something beyond 20 feet, your eyes focus as though you're focused on something infinitely distant from you. It's all the same out beyond 20 feet as far as eye focus is concerned. Your eyes are utmost relaxed when you're staring off into a distance. That 1,000-yard stare being one example of that, associated with a certain kind of hypnotism, fascination, related behavior. So the triangle trying to manifest fully in Fortune isn't quite there yet. And the imagery in the card relates the idea that you're basically studying and bringing up faculties. Whereas the Chariot, these same faculties that are trying to develop are at least well established in regards being kept at heel or still, so that they're not particularly seen outside the realm of decor, right? They're not seen behaving in public. They're just basically sitting there like stone statues at the feet of this meditating figure. The stance of the Sphinx in Fortune is meditative. It's a lion stance, but it's basically a lion at rest, right? So the seated figure in the Chariot is the same analogy. Anyway, the point I was trying to get at is this practice of temperance, right? Associated with ritual activity or any kind of intelligent activity. It's a natural thing that has its own automaticity out of Leo through Virgo, right? Thus, there's a practice associated with developing it and maintaining it to a fully appropriate scale, right? Part of that involves tempering emotional reactivity. The lightning bolts coming out of the bottom of the card, they're associated with confusion in this imagery in the fortune card, right? The trump card. It's one step in the background from the chariot in the stacks that are opened up into the secret tree of alchemy from the tarot deck. So this is kind of a background activity. It's a private activity. So that your appearances in the world can be, appropriately polished, like polished stone in the case of those little Capricorn confused figures down there on the bottom that quote unquote don't know how to act yet. So they are at least at heel. They're silenced. But they're still there. Okay, you're still to some degree a confused individual out in the world, right? And this confusion interferes with the formation of the triangle. Not only as a specified shape or figure, of specific shape, symbolizing Cancer, it's also symbolic of Gemini, which symbolizes the infinite possibilities of social interaction. If social interaction is in Gemini, social inclusion tends to emphasize Cancer, to where you're part of a specific group in time, right? You've endeared yourself into this group that has most often some form or another of specific practice associated with it. It could be your work environment. It could be your home environment where your family resides with you. It could be the surrounding community made up of factory workers or white-collar people warehoused nearby in some productive situation going on a corporate scale. It could be anything along those lines. Or it could be temple activity, where specific rituals are practiced. So this idea of emotional reactivity combined with stasis in life, manifest stasis in Capricorn, this brings about confusion, ambivalence, and emotional reactivity kind of together, all of which are tempered in the ritual activity taking place. In fortune, we're talking about activities designed to result in fortune. And these are kind of perpetually maintained activities in the Cancer sense of the word, compared with down in Aquarius where the star resides. Down there, it's about labor conducted in serene beauty, right? Beatific existence on earth, working with what is provided to produce something in faith that something will result in you, from your labors, right? But up in Cancer, these things are almost perpetual, as though the universe itself is driven out of pure light and ultimately pure darkness, working together through Taurus initiations, the divine sparks of creation, right? Drive things that take place considered at a Cancer level of analogy. And Leo is kind of the next step in that, as an initiation of automatic scope, right? Initiated out of the unconscious experience, or lack thereof, I should say, experience-wise. But experience is stored up in Cancer as kind of a spiritual reserve. It's kind of expressive of the idea of soul maintaining itself on a universal scale, in tune with the universe, and the universe is, considered from interdimensional Gemini perspective, right? The magic mirror perspective. In fortune, Aquarius and Leo are combined together in the Sphinx, okay? This combination can symbolize Scorpio most readily, but also Taurus. It implies such. That shows up in the chariot in the form of Aquarius and Scorpio faculties are facing forward, whereas the Taurus and Leo faculties of mind are facing to the sides and are somehow darkened, right? As though in the background more, from out of the perceptual dark, so to speak. Scorpio, Aquarius are fully perceived in light. This doesn't imply good or evil symbolism here at all. If anything, it's more like chessboard symbolism somehow. The gold bars at their feet, right? That the depths of the ocean, I guess, own, because this is telling the story of the development of Stoic philosophy from its very beginnings in ancient Greece. And probably elsewhere on the planet, a number of cultures probably have something like this going on, because this is human psychology, right? And related philosophy is developing towards scientific discipline in modern times. When one is engaged in these meditative activities, one is making one's own universe as kind of a map of reality and of the mind in doing so. So that's what's going on with these two trump cards here too. This is like a universal practice that maintains itself naturally in human psychology. Something that maintains itself in seemingly perpetual fashion is a Cancer analogy. The soul maintains itself seemingly perpetually, though there are drives from which it, derives its initiative that it is maintaining continually, right? So there's a function that drives that maintenance. Same way a librarian might pull a book off a library shelf and add 2 books to the library shelf. And the one book that was pulled maybe goes somewhere for maintenance before it winds up on maybe another library's shelf somewhere, or the same shelf. I just thought I'd go over the whole concept of care again as it applies to the astrological sign of Cancer. With Cancer, both the water element and the earth element are associated with it strongly. From a self-orientation perspective, it is the earth element. Okay, that's why we have figures in both of these trump cards sitting in positions that are associated with meditation. One, a lion figure in the form of a sphinx, also symbolic of the pharaoh's hand. Leo, hand with 5 fingers, right? Pharaoh, the head on the lion body, right? Now, the other element that is associated with the astrological sign of Cancer is the water element, which is situationally oriented in perspective, right? So this is these ideas are symbolized together under the astrological sign of Cancer as a river analogy, right? Similar to the river Nile. The idea is that the earth, the riverbed, channels the water element in the form of the river, right? Rivers rise and fall and flood, and they change in how they express themselves through the seasons and through the centuries, sometimes in association with droughts or an overabundance of snowfall up in the mountains, right? And the great famine that Moses talked about is going to be featured quite a bit in this discussion. People who are privy to what's going on in the mountains up, Turkey way and beyond, in the Caucasian mountains and other surrounding mountains in the region, would know that it looks like a time of famine would be coming, right? So these people that Moses talked about, including Joseph, would be in a position to advise someone like a pharaoh as to the coming conditions that are likely to spread through the region, right? based on that kind of information, possibly also based on their own influence in infiltrating their way into Egypt and becoming problematic the way they did in Europe later. On a cultural, infiltrative level, Abrahamic, cultic. Well, anyway, back to what I was talking about with the elements. Care practiced in some form or another channels a kind of love. So the care practice is earth elemental, very basic, right, as I've described earlier. Usually symbolized by the feet in some tarot card, like temperance, some versions of temperance, right? How the angelic figure, positions the feet, water and earth at the same time. That's Cancer symbolic. Also symbolizes bank perspective maintained. In other words, you can afford to conduct science in life, right? And not be dependent merely on philosophy to get you through life. Philosophy is another one of those contextual baselines out of which, even science developed. So you can always practice philosophy, no matter what position in life you happen to be in. And to some degree, you could say the same thing about scientific perspectives maintained in life, right? But serious science is expensive and requires a certain amount of bank, which also happens to be a care analogy, right? That the ancient pharaoh, I believe Khufu was his name, made use of in building the Great Pyramid out of a grain elevator, a big stone grain elevator, according to theories developed by some people, I think earlier in this century. I forget who exactly, but a book has been written on that particular subject. So we have, in the form of the Great Pyramid, an expression of some manner of care that is also associated into modern times with banking as a means of care, or, careful administration, in other words, right? Of course, the grain elevator would be maintaining a currency in the form of corn, right? A grain. And that would be the grain that Moses talked about being kept under the Pharaoh's hand or something to that effect, whereas other grain was kept in the cities during the famine that, took place, and people out of, Jewish people basically came into Egypt during the second year of the famine. Joseph was an advisor to the Pharaoh. According to some lore, became Pharaoh for a brief period of time. May have, been referred to as Jedefre. So, as kind of a pharaoh that some talk about, but others don't talk about in the historical accounts from the time, the ancient literature or whatever. So, we're talking about careful multi-purposing here. And what amounts to, symbolically speaking, a bank situation, right? Banking, an account of some kind. The Pharaoh built an account of grain out at the Giza Plateau because it's a perfect location for such activities, right? We have a grain bank out there for a time with a big platform leading past the Sphinx out towards the Nile where people could come and go and purchase grain at the Giza Plateau, where the Great Pyramid was built up over time. At first, they had a grain elevator, according to this account that I read recently, with a big door, a big swiveling door, perfectly balanced door that allowed access so people could go in with their pottery or whatever and purchase grain and then leave. It was understood ahead of time this would be an issue as soon as people finally did run out of grain that they had stocked up in the cities. They would come to the Pharaoh's grain elevator to purchase grain, and the Pharaoh became very rich. So this is a model for modern banking, in my view. How people are in the world over are being made dependent upon a banking infrastructure that is Jewish, the Rothschilds' banking empire. Catholicism having been involved in developing that system. Catholicism, of course, having been infiltrated much as ancient Egyptian society had been infiltrated. Eventually with, the Jews being cast out of, into exile out of Egypt. I believe the parting of the Red Sea or something like that. So, symbolic parting of ways of, care. The water element, being parted and then having to cross through the bed of the sea, the earth element and all that to get out of Egypt. It's all symbolic. These things didn't literally happen any more than Jesus literally transformed water into wine. Okay. Jesus, in doing so, took information, water, and transformed it into what amounts to entertainment, right? So the people who made that story up were saying Jesus was spending his time disinforming people, maybe usefully, maybe not, I don't know. Maybe they were just making, commentary to the effect that he was a great speaker, public speaker. So you mix a little entertainment in there, right? The water becomes wine. You have charisma, in other words, right? Wine's associated with social interaction and all that. But anyway, this practice of care will bring a corresponding love into the world. Okay, that's the big secret of care. So people can be effectively unified through a banking empire. But this is a compulsory form of cultic unification that has been experimented with in modern times via Scientology, which is basically its own kind of cultic banking scheme, right? They're imitating even the Federal Reserve and the IRS, right? The global banking system, but they're doing it on a compulsory destructive cultic scale, carefully maintained, to conduct itself, technically at least, in legal fashion as far as law enforcement is concerned, right? Though unethically. So many of the means that are made use of to control people through compulsory destructive means are unethical at the very least, if not illegally so, in the sense that, you might be murdering people or raping people or whatever, which supposedly has become an issue with Scientology in recent decades, resulting in their contribution to the Hollywood effort to empower allegations to the point where mere allegations destroy lives and put people behind bars, without any real evidence presented, right? That's what that whole program is all about. People are being taken under compulsory destructive control through banking, all right? What follows next is based quite a bit on, loosely anyway, on information also available on Thoth tutorials on YouTube. Thoth Tarot Tutorials, I think it was called, the site. I basically took down some rather hasty notes from the presentations on the Chariot and Fortune, the tarot cards, bypassing the information on divination, just something I've practiced and found to be quite interesting, but I'm rather basically just occasionally toying around with that practice. So the Chariot in Cancer, peace in action, in quotes up here I've written down. So I guess he's talking about peace in action as being the basic symbolism of this card, the Chariot. That's why the chariot is very still, but there's some kind of activity taking place, which is, in my view, largely meditative, right? But also involves prepping. That's where we get back into the grain elevator analogy, right? Maintaining your house as kind of a carefully constructed and mouse-proof grain elevator, right? Like the Great Pyramids of Giza, if you could think of that as an expression of the Pharaoh's house. And he also talks about the Hebrew letter kaith, which means field or fence, okay? Now that Hebrew lettering symbolizes the idea that in Cancer, the astrological sign, something finite in scope and scale has been established from out of what we would think of as the mysteries, right? The mystery of Gemini interacting with Aries through Taurus. Taurus touching upon the pure oblivion of Aries and bringing forth infinite scale due to Taurus's multitudinal establishment, right, in its action. You think of two, the symbolism of two ram heads coming together and crashing into each other, producing divine spark. Well, that divine spark would be Taurus, and the infinite multitude of these divine sparks coming and going at all times would then be Gemini, which is an expression of pure illumination or pure light or pure movement, which is something we cannot experience directly. But somehow our universe comes out of that. All that interdimensionality of Gemini produces our dimension in relative serenity and tranquility. Much of the symbolism of that serenity and tranquility caught up in the symbolism of the tarot cards, the Chariot, and Fortune. Now, Fortune plays a game, like I've discussed before, of relative abstraction, similar to what you might find in ancient Egyptian art found in the various temples and grave sites around Egypt, ancient Egypt, on the west side of the Nile. This became the land of the dead, so to speak, if you could think of it as the Disney quote-unquote version of the land of the dead. I think it was understood that this area would become kind of a graveyard or a junk heap, right? So that's kind of captures the symbolism of Aries. Practical symbolism relating to, that's really more Pisces high and Aquarius on a practical level, but darkened in a way, with, grave sites, dark areas, underground and what have you, to symbolize Aries, the underworld, that is so mysterious, right, that it's just complete dark. I kind of lost track of what I was trying to get at here. I got sidetracked with all this grave, the cemetery thinking, right? Yeah, supposedly Kaith adds up to 14 in gematria. Numerologically, that becomes 13, which becomes 4. So 13 symbolizes intelligence, unity, in my opinion, right? This what I've been talking about here, this union between Aries and Gemini, 1 and 3, becoming a unity in Cancer, or a universe unity, right? It's a collectivity and it's a constitution. At the same time, a constituency of unified nature, or a unit of some kind, operating seemingly in perpetual fashion like I've described before, but that's only because we observe these things from our observational perspective, grounded in Pisces low. So we have intelligence unity. In other words, there's an activity there, okay, which can be symbolized by meditation, very aptly because that captures quite a bit of the nature of this activity, right? It's a unit of intelligence of a kind, our universe. Things are, shall we say, swapped out and swapped back in again from out of seeming mystery from our observational perspective down in Pisces low and Sagittarius, right? So things seem perpetual there. It seems like something's perpetually maintaining our universe, but it's a mystery, so it gives it a perpetual appearance. The drive that drives our universe, that literally actively maintains the spin of everything in the universe through energetic, influential means, the Earth being an example, spinning as, the forces that move the jet streams along a certain way, a certain specific direction, relative to the sun and the whole solar system moving in a direction that you could call north, polar north for the sun, through the universe, orbiting the Milky Way, the black hole at the center of, and all that. There's a certain kind of perpetual nature to that is driven and maintained at the same time. The Earth's spin has an energetic drive that maintains it. It's a very subtle force because it doesn't have to be anything more than that. So if you overwhelm the situation, you could force a planet out of orbit or whatever, right? But that would take a tremendous amount of applied force because the planet has so much mass, right? But conceivably it could happen if the force were strong enough, the applied force. So 13, that's basically what it means. 4 being, the next numerological step. I try never to miss these final steps. It's like, the final solution, the most basic expression of what's going on is symbolized by the number 4. The 4th step in creation. Cardinal water means reserve water or energy or the initiative of water over there with the cardinal signs on the left side of the secret tree of alchemy, right? That's situational. The water situation in the universe is the universe contains the water. What you hear, others hear if they tune into you or you tune into them for whatever reason. This is a vampirism world, the banking world. Okay? The compulsory destructive banking world, which is compulsory destructive cultic, to the tune of international and central banking. So the situation with water, right, is that the universe contains water. Therefore, the bowl in the lap of the knight in the card on the chariot contains blood, water, the life blood of the universe, right? And there's a certain amount of it in there, and it seems like he's building it up. He's working with the mysteries through his meditation to build up some water reserve. Just enough. You don't need any more than you actually need, or else you'll be flooded, right? The great flood of yore and lore, right? Situation is, quote unquote, in the bowl, okay, for water. So that which makes up the bowl is somehow earth elemental or a grounding point. Meditation is a means used to ground the spirit, right, on an earthly level by bringing serenity to it and related tranquility as an experience. It brings its own kind of illumination at some point, according to people who get seriously into these practices, because it does become a talent of peak experiential nature in time, right? Meditation. So field or fence, a finite universe is established, symbolized by the bowl. The bowl symbolizes the whole universe, also symbolizes, as a symbol of along these lines, Jupiter. The bowl was like a ritual situation of quote-unquote Jupiter scale, which you could call tempered scale also, because these things that I'm discussing now are associated with the practice of temperance. Relative serenity, tranquility maintained, through which intelligence naturally channels, right? Thus further reinforcing the value of tempered practices. So Moses up on his mountaintop symbolizes the same idea as the blood in the bowl, okay? Because the bowl can be construed as a hill. Now you would associate more with the trump cards titled the Hermit and Magus, right? The Magus or the Magician. You flip the bowl over and it's a hill, and then the blood spots on top of the hill. They use this symbolism in The Diary of a Teenage Girl, 2015, in the form of a bloody X on top of somebody's leg. Like it's a hilltop or something, right? Symbolizing peak experience. In that case, we're talking about a sexual experience of initial design, initiating the sex life, right? In that case, you're talking about a 15-year-old girl, but she's actually 22. The actor. So this bowl is also referred to as the Holy Grail, with spiral handles that are similar in design to two rams coming together, right? Symbolizes the divine spark creation that creates from either end of the bowl, the universe, right? Our universe. Through the mystery of Gemini, right? The mystery of pure illumination that results. So there's illumination collecting up in the bowl that you could say mysteriously somehow contributes to the maintenance of the bowl from its end, while the meditating knight, maintains the bowl from his end. So the bowl symbolizes an act of care. On the one hand, there's absolution granted out of Taurus. Priests symbolize Taurus, right? They symbolize intelligence on that level. Like, the most fundamental expression of human intelligence in human society has been organized since at least as far back as ancient Egyptian times into priesthoods, right? As intelligence network expressions. You find grounding and meditation and reflecting time on a mountaintop, and you come down with new ideas. So toss at people, see how they react. And facial visor is made integral with the body armor in this symbolism. It's the same kind of facial mask covering you find down in Libra. Symbolizes the same basic idea of the body fashioned in style. In this case, we're talking about some kind of naturalism-related style, right, associated with the creation of an entire universe. So Gemini becomes in Libra the emotions, right? Rather, shall we say, field harmonically. They field harmonize together as the water element on a self-orientation, and Gemini is the air element on a situation level, right? You look up at the sky to see the symbolism of Gemini, day or night. It could be the sun or it could be the stars, and the movements related to the zodiac. But the visor can also symbolize Capricorn, which is very earth elemental in a situation orientation level, right? So you've taken some stuff and fashioned it with style to, this is what goes on with your body as you develop. Either you have been cared for properly or you haven't, right? In this symbolism, we're looking at a cared for suit of armor, symbolic of the body. The mind is focused on the body in meditation in the chariot, and also the situation surrounding the body, which is an intelligence situation, making it water elemental, right? The earth contains that also, it contains our reality as an intelligence situation. You derive intelligence from it. You derive various forms of providence from it. Active providence and inactive providence. As soon as we start coming up with words for these things, then we can start to come up with symbolism, right? Stuff laying around is a kind of providence, if you know what to do with it. Mother provides for you actively in feeding you during your childhood, hopefully the right foods, so that your body can develop or fashion itself in a manner of style. Sagittarius taking on Virgo properties that you could call naturalistic or natural. Your body can develop in a natural style, expressive of human health and the health of the entire universe, even, really, when you come down to it. The red cloak, that has the passion of Leo, as I mentioned before, but he talks about the inner cloak and the outer cloak. The inner cloak is white, which symbolizes the illumination of Gemini. Yeah, the white is Gemini, the red is Leo. They're kind of combined together to suggest Cancer in between. Okay? I believe that's the only place I've seen in this deck where that symbolism is used for some reason. Yeah, and of course, the reason the red is to the outside is because Leo's situation is passionate. Gemini's situation is air elemental. Yeah, you're maintaining intelligence for yourself and actively involved in focusing, and you got the red, or the passion symbolism, directed out at the world via the cloak that's being worn, which is basically the same idea as the Spartan cloaks that I've read about. The wheels on the chariot, of course, are the same idea as the cloak along these lines, right? The wheels come in contact with the golden road, the bricks, the golden bricks, or the quote-unquote yellow bricks of other stories, right? Which can be likened to treasure lost at sea, right? That kind of symbolism is used in movies with, people crossing streets, areas that have been supposedly, past experience-wise lost at sea. Past incarnations, vampires have been at work, stealing from you, basically. Banking system at work. So, the darkness of the depths of the ocean and the darkness or the blackness of a city street are kind of the same analogy. Gold has been taken and turned into bricks and put in some kind of a vault somewhere for somebody else's access purposes, right? But there are ways of accessing this gold that has been lost, right? Meditatively speaking, different kinds of meditation. Oh yes, the white cloak, the inner cloak, symbolizes, according to this, in quotes, purity of purpose. And then, of course, you have, in quotes, passion associated with the red outer cloak. That would be Leo situation. And, of course, the white is Gemini situation. Gemini self is water elemental, like the water in the bowl in Chariot. 21 golden bricks on the road, the yellow brick road down there. So there's a lot of multi-purposed analogy at work here, just like with the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's a multi-purpose place. It's used for systematic expressions of being not only a grain elevator and then a former grain elevator transformed into a tomb, but also a place of meditation. It's symbolic of meditation practices and also alchemy of universal scale and beyond universal scale and interdimensional scale, right? Pyramids come to a point at the pinnacle of the pyramid where the quote-unquote pharaoh sits in golden splendor, right? Reflecting light from the top of the pyramid that casts out for 100 miles in all directions, depending on where the sun is during the day. And then, of course, you would assume starlight also, in a more mild degree, reflects around the area, right? According to this book I've read, they used polished granite to surface the entire pyramid, but I've read from other sources that it was white limestone, finely finished, right? So either or, it's reflective, right? In fact, white limestone would be even more effective than granite for that purpose. And then you have like a gold-plated expression of capstone, right? Which either was never there or was removed. Either way, it's symbolic of the idea of out-of-body presence, peak experience presence, you might say, on the top of the hill or mound, which becomes like an expression of a breast with the nipple and the areola at the top, at the pinnacle position up there. The pharaoh's hand feeds, supposedly, or something like that. There are ancient images of the pharaoh sitting on top of a pile of corn, accounting, writing things down, with other assistants also doing similar. And also, it's a guarded location while it's a grain elevator, and it's also walled in with a huge defensive wall, right? That grain is protected, right? To last as far into the famine as they can possibly make it last. And the pharaoh becomes rich because he can sell it for whatever price he wants, right? And then you have in the background a figure that's supposedly, according to some sources, the same source that I read, Joseph or Chedefre, advising, right? That figure is not clearly present, but symbolizes a context of some kind that's in the background. Same as the fortune trump is in the background of the chariot. The chariot is clearly expressed as the face card, even to the point where you can recognize brass, copper, etc. But fortune is a little bit more cartoon-like in the background as a context for the chariot. And of course, the chariot, it focuses on the body, the physical grounding presence, I guess, established in the form of our universe, right? But something mysterious supports that you could call studied intelligence, which is where you're building fortune, right? If you study things worth studying, you're building fortune. You are becoming rich, regardless of your physical circumstances, no matter how Spartan they may be. If you spend all your time watching television, though, you are becoming poor, comparatively speaking anyway, compared with somebody who studies the philosophies and the sciences and the mathematics and the grammars, right? If you want to be rich, you got to be rich. And there's a compulsory destructive cultic system at work designing to control wealth in accordance with compulsory class stratification standards being put in place, where on a certain level it is deemed that, you are from a certain caste, right, or socioeconomic class. And there you will stay most likely all your life. 21, of course, is numerologically expresses the idea of 3. So 2 to the left is Taurus there, or on the right side of the tree, anatomical position speaking, and then 1 is over kind of to the left in comparison, right? 2 and 1 becomes 3. That symbolizes the formation of Gemini, so that's a particularly important number. Golden bricks on the road. So somehow the bricks of Aries have been made golden. And the wheels contact the road at 2 points, just like the 2 handles contact the bowl at 2 points. See? The whale's coming into contact with the road. Same idea as two ram's heads coming together at a single point to produce what you could call a divine spark. This chariot is at rest, relatively speaking, but there's an activity taking place, though everything is perfectly still as far as physical motion is concerned. So there's action, right, taking place. The crab, of course, that's a symbolic expression of the idea of a house that can move at will when it needs to. Kind of a socioeconomic ideal you kind of build up in life, same as a bank account, right? 4 cherubims, or sphinxes as described in the tutorial I referred to earlier, right? The YouTube tutorial. Yeah, those are down at the bottom of the card. They're also in kind of a meditative, brought to heel position, as though well-conditioned and serene in the expression of it. They've been very well trained. This is automaticity at work. It's efficient. There's no conflict associated with it. The only conflict there is expressed is in the Capricorn symbolism, which is just these figures, these astrological figures have all been mixed up with one another. So they're in the process of developing into what they finally become when they're fully fashioned into individual archetypes, right? Associated with the fixed signs of the astrological zodiac. They're kind of lined up with the 4 pillars too, which are in copper, symbolizing emotion. The copper symbolizes the emotion of Libra above Capricorn, right? So Libra, the emotions are a very important part of what forms the symbolism of a pillar or a column in, like, for example, ancient Greek architecture and other architecture, which is somewhat universal out of Western Asia and into Eastern Asia and even into other parts of the world. The Holy Grail has within it 6 rays in the fluid fill, which is blood, and it can symbolize water or blood. This could be like also a racial consideration of blood, or an ethnic consideration, or a religious consideration, as in a certain group of people keep themselves pinnacle, even as a minority, okay, through industrious activity, which, on the one hand, you can't fault them for, because this is natural. Can't fault them for having an understanding of it either, but you can fault them when they abuse it, which they happen to be in a position to keep secret, right? Because they're an intelligence network. So they've designed the legal system so that you can't legally fault them for anything, right? And the system is also designed so that any accusations directed against them will, quote unquote, cost you, in accordance with Jack the Ripper lore discussed recently in my videos. Banking culture will simply tax you, okay? IRS, etc. And related, having to do with what is becoming law enforcement in our time, the civil courts, which don't care about your right to free speech. Now, should that be allowed? Is there such thing as defamation? Well, defamation only operates in an organized criminal world where people have been conditioned away from natural temperance in life, to where they take what people say too seriously and are not genuinely critical and logical, reasonable, sensible. They've been watching TV all their lives, and they worship celebrities, and they live and die over what happens in Hollywood. So much of the civil court system is, in my view, organized criminal, to include this defamation stuff. What somebody says shouldn't pull that much weight compared with what evidence reveals, right? And, justifiably collected evidence, I might add, in accordance with standards set in common law that people accept for good reason and not ill reason. Too much of our legal system is ill-reasoned, all right? So the blood red in the bowl symbolizes intelligence, right? Intelligence, networking. Even the hand of Pharaoh, who is of familial blood, right? Also symbolized by the Sphinx on the top of the wheel in fortune, right? This is also referred to as the glyph of the sun, or, it's basically the solar disk all over again. It's got a red point in the center that touches base with the symbolism. You could think of the circle with a point in it as a hill with a pinnacle, or a bowl with, a little center at the bottom that fluid begins to collect up into, right? Or, the breast, okay? So, purple amethyst stone bowl, okay? It's tempered. It provides care when it is properly tempered. When a parent starts to become, distempered in life, they become abusive, right? They're abusive to their children, and they raise their children to become abusive people. Okay. Punishments are something you got to regulate very careful in raising children. And I don't think Christianity does it. But, they're too quick with the rod. The rod is something that should be reserved for severe situations. And I think I could raise a child without ever hitting a child. The red dot in the center, that's a meditative focus too. Just like the way that chambers are in the Great Pyramid of Giza are lined up. So you're focusing upwards towards the pinnacle on top of that pyramid, right? There are no hieroglyphics inside the Great Pyramid, except a few words that have been written here and there with, I think, pharaohs' names or something like that. Always in hidden places that you have to uncover by, destructively exploring the pyramids, or maybe, I'm not sure the exact methods they use to get up into those areas. But from the looks of things, according to this book, I don't have it right now with me. It's an ebook I bought ages ago. The walls inside the pyramid are pretty much just smooth, the granite walls in various different locations. And the cornerstones of the Great Pyramid is the only pyramid in ancient Egypt, out of ancient Egypt, that has its cornerstones anchored into the ground so that they can't be moved. As huge as those stones are, what are they worried about, potentially moving those stones out of position, whether it be earthquakes or the fact that they're going to fill a huge chamber inside the pyramid full of grain and then run this thing as a grain elevator, right? So they design it multi-purpose, but also designed it to be built up over a period of, pretty long period of time, comprising, a total of maybe 15 years of construction. But at first, it's built into a grain elevator that operates as a grain elevator, and they're continually building up the area around it while they're selling grain out of the place, and the pharaoh is accounting for everything, collecting up a lot of money and wealth, right? To the point where in the end, supposedly, he can very expensively finish the outer surface of the pyramid and turn it into a tomb. But also, in my view, a religious center of particularly abstract design, because there's no hieroglyphics anywhere in the Great Pyramid of Giza, right? Those things show up typically at least later, towards Middle Kingdom and I guess Late Kingdom. Into the Middle Kingdom, they start showing up a lot more. Based on traditions established earlier where people are buried and they put graffiti in their grave sites to the effect, I helped build the Great Pyramid of Giza and all that kind of stuff. So the pharaohs are kind of doing the same thing the people are doing. Blood red is summer solstice, symbolic in Cancer. So the sun is pinnacle relative to the northern hemisphere, right? In Cancer. The Tropic of Cancer kind of forming a line right underneath the sun, so to speak, which is pinnacle. in the month of Cancer. The month is, the time that, defines Cancer, right? Maximum sunlight, maximum illumination, maximum intelligence. You got 6 rays. The ray symbolizes Libra, but 6 symbolizes Virgo. The rays are coming out of the pinnacle of the hill, right? Just like with the pyramid, reflecting the sun's rays in golden light all around the area, the light changing throughout the day as the sun passes over. Many of the obelisks did similarly for a more localized effect, right? And a sphinx symbolizes the same general thing as an obelisk. It's like a guardian kind of out and to the side of the entrance way into the Great Pyramid where they were selling all the grain to the people at probably a pretty hefty price, right? So they're setting up, you could argue the initial establishment of what would become our modern banking system all the way back then. But it's also, in my view, a system of genocide because Christianity resulted from it as the gifted blanket full of disease, right? For the populations undergoing systematic control or systematic takeover to the point where they could be made slaves or dead, but in time they become peasants. Okay? Which is, you could argue, is content slavery. But where you don't have bargaining rights for your labor, the value of your labor. So a lot of these ideas that Marx worked with are valid ideas, just like in other philosophies. But, things are presented in a way where you're expected to swallow the whole system whole and become a cultic expression of that system and thus compulsory destructive to self and others. So the communists have not escaped from Christianity, but rather are caught up in controlled opposition with Christianity of, compulsory destructive cultic scope. So the glyph of the sun could be semen, could be blood, and it's taken on the dot inside the circle symbolism of the solar disk. Also symbolic of the hand of Pharaoh, I guess you could say. That little dot in the center, radiating emotion, light, illumination about. So a lot of the symbolism of the Great Pyramid of Giza is caught up in the symbolism of this card, telling essentially a story very similar to what Moses told from his mountaintop perspective that he was famous for, right? You become kingly when you become wise. You develop a love of knowledge, right? Philosophy. Philosophical capabilities that become scientific over time as you become technically competent in some manner or another, right? Down the rainbow path of pH. I'm supposed to remember what that means. Over the rainbow is beyond Gemini, so you're walking into a dream, which would be a Pisces high symbolism, right? While it is solute, but as it crystallizes into your mind, it becomes Sagittarius, part of human perception and logic workings taking place there. Logic should be reasonable, it should be sensible. It should be grounded in reality somehow. Even fanciful dreams, if they're of value, are going to ground that way to make some kind of reasonable sense. Then he talks about abracadabra, the letter C substituted for the letter H. You've got 11 letters. That's Aquarius symbolism. That symbolizes deliberate work, labor of magical scale, right? Of peak experiential scale. Yeah, C symbolizes Taurus, H symbolizes Libra, as though they're interchangeable. The interchangeability of those two things it implies Gemini, but also rays emanating from a point. So the C is like the point, and the H is the rays, see, associated with the solar disk symbolism. And it's all related to labors engaged in. It took a tremendous amount of labor to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. Fortune. Okay, now we're getting into fortune. Tarot card. Oh, also you've got sapphires. A cut stone symbolizes Virgo. Raw stone symbolizes Cancer. Just like grain is a raw material that is processed into breads and beers, in ancient Egyptian lore. Well, you've got stones, raw stones, a Cancer symbol that you've got collected up that can be cut. Once they're cut and polished, they become Virgo symbolic. So you got 10 of these things. White sapphires, I believe, which are associated traditionally with Gemini for one thing, but Taurus certainly, but also Libra especially. Sapphire, of course, is a softer stone than diamond, which would be Aries symbolic. So sapphire is associated here with Cancer. 10 of them means Gemini. That's intelligence. You have absolution at work in your armor. That you've got these stones. Your armor has been so well cared for. It's a polished brass, for crying out loud. That's care. Brass is difficult to maintain, by the way. A brass doorknob, for example. But just like with copper, it's an antiseptic metal, right? But it's maintained with polishing and care. Same as a diamond is polished and cut. Armor is fashioned, right? That's Virgo symbolism at work. Expressive of style. Style is directly expressive of care maintained for the long term, right? Even the style that your body takes on over time as it's cared for through life. And then once it becomes more specific in nature, it's fashion, which is Sagittarius. So 10 sapphires symbolizes both Gemini and Cancer at work, providing absolution. Each one of these little diamonds is the same thing as what's going on with the solar disk, bowl, or hill, okay? You've got 360 degrees of perspective on top of that hill. That symbolizes Sagittarius all around you. You've got so many options as far as directions to move in life, right? When you're pinnacle. You can go any direction you want, it seems like, although the situation alters things. You go the wrong direction off of a mountaintop and you find yourself very quickly deceased. Maybe to be found mummified centuries later, up there on a field of rocks. Not too far from the peak that you achieved earlier, right? So you still have to use care coming down from that mountaintop, but from up there you can see all around. It's a unique peak experience kind of experience, right? Even though it's cold and there's very little oxygen up there. Fountainhead for justice. That's what I wrote. I think the quotes are mine, though. That's why I got a question mark over there. That's a question that came up. That's the 6 rays coming out of the peak up there. Basically, justice is a form of currency in Libra, right? You either have it or you don't, and it can be corrupted, polluted. So our court system right now is corrupt. It's an organized criminal expression. The organized criminals have done all the work required to take it over, and the people have done no work in their own interest, comparatively speaking. They've been spending their time watching television and equivalent to television, basically useless entertainments. So they are not of the same class as the people who have taken over the court system, who are organized criminals, and they can get away with being organized criminals because the people are not intelligent enough to compete with them for their own lives, right? Also, the canopy over the head of the knight in the chariot is symbolic of Nut, as an expression of the zodiac, the goddess Nut. So that's a Gemini symbol. All these trump cards express things in an as above, so below manner. And the Pharaoh, for example, in creating his grain bank or elevator, okay? You could think of the chariot as an elevator expression, even in the sense of being an elevator, a meditation posture, right? It elevates one into illumination over time, right? But there's a certain amount of absolution provided from mysterious perspective. It's the same idea as in some tarot cards. The hand comes out of the cloud and passes a tool, an implement of some kind of elemental scope to who? Well, anyone that can be intelligent enough to receive the item, right? The Magus does this by, reaching up and grabbing things out of like a matrix that's in the air around him, right? 4-point stars symbolize books. The sword, or the mental focus, opens one of the books for the Sphinx on top of the wheel of fortune, right? Or the wheel of the zodiac, you could say, or the wheel of the earth, the wheel of the universe. The Sphinx understands the universe. So 5-pointed stars would symbolize persons, individuals. They're out and about. And you're out and about, right? Hey, that's why you've got the lion body on. You're out and about. You're wearing a suit of armor in a position of meditation. Relatively speaking, you're not as out and about. Your mind is focused on your body in perfect stillness and relaxation, right? But in the fortune card, you're in some manner associated with your house, but you're also out and about. You're imagining things. You're thinking of things. You're dreaming things. You're focusing on like points at a distance that you call destinations. It could be goals. You could be reflecting upon your goals as the Sphinx on top of that wheel, right? Any number of things that are associated with object relations. You're relating to an object of some kind or another other than yourself in the symbolism of fortune, okay? So in this case, mental focus accesses a book or some constitutional expression out there as an object that you're exploring. You're talking to somebody, you're engaged in social intercourse, you're locked, your gazes are locked onto each other back and forth appropriately for conversation, back and forth. You're developing insight into another person as they develop insight into you. So they're penetrating you. So that's where you come up with this relations and intercourse symbolism that's shared between sexual relations and social relations interchangeably, right? They have 10-pointed star symbolizing Gemini. But, different points symbolize different ideas. Sphinx is, I guess, both ancient Egyptian, but the Greeks have their own version of the Sphinx with a woman's head. That basically you're required to pay up a riddle, an answer to a riddle, right? Something along the lines of, how do I get grain today? Well, if you cough up the right answer in the form of money, you can pass this point, and the killer Sphinx then is effectively dead to you, right? You answer the riddle, and the Sphinx screams in terror and dies, or something like that in the Greek lore, the ancient Greek lore. But in going to do grain business at the grain elevator, the big stone grain elevator out there in the Giza Plateau, you walk away from your boat out there in the Nile, past the Sphinx, into the front entrance of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is situated to face away from Egypt out to the world. Okay. This is a system. It's like a business scheme, right? They're bringing business even from other lands, to the grain elevator to buy grain during this time of need. And it's supposed to be expressive of sulfur, the Sphinx, the element, or, the alchemical consideration of sulfur, which which is fiery, I believe. It's an unstable chemical under certain circumstances. And also you've got Typhon down there on the wheel, an ancient Greek god associated, generally speaking. The tutorial has the details on this, but the symbolic details. But I've associated this with Capricorn. It's kind of a hanged man symbol that hangs down on the wheel, as though, the wheel, the ladder becomes the same thing as the piece of wood that the hanged man is roped over in other tarot card expressions. There's a snake that binds the foot of the hanged man to an ankh in Crowley's version of the hanged man. Up there at Aries, it's in the Aries stack as the second card behind the Emperor as face card, right? So it's kind of like the hanged man in an Aries sense, but it's an expression of it in the world that's trying to develop or climb the ladder, so to speak. It's a confused state of mind that's like the alligator in the water surfacing. Okay? It's a Capricorn symbol. It's very dangerous. It symbols out of the dark depths of the river and then comes to the surface very dangerously, maybe staring at you from a distance. That's what this god symbolism relates to. It carries an ankh in its hand. So the hanged man could release him or herself from being, hanged man status if it were of a mind to do so. What is required for that? Tempered intelligence, for one thing. Developed frontal lobe as a result, right? So you have executive function capabilities in life to free yourself from confusion, so to speak, of Capricorn scope. The semi-awakeness of being woke, for example, in our time, associated with Capricorn. So it's a Capricorn symbol associated in the symbolism with Aries and, via hanged man symbolism, right? You're kind of the hanged man in both Aries and Capricorn at the same time. So the hanged man basically stretches all the way down the left side of the secret tree of alchemy through the cardinal signs there, right? Illumination is being gathered for a time of awakening at some point, right? To reincarnate into a world. Maybe. The gathering of illumination is both Gemini and Libra in scope. On an emotional level, emotional energies and bioenergetically speaking, it's Libra. But on a deeper spiritual, illuminative level, it is Gemini. That's one of the figures, is one of the faculties undergoing development. He just started studying into a subject. He keeps his studies secret until he becomes an expert. Okay? That's where you get all that brought to heel symbolism going on in the Chariot. These things that are developing are also pulling the Chariot along, so to speak, or prepared to do so when the time comes. That means study time, right? The Chariot will be pulled along and the Sphinx will be engaged in studying. A distant point ahead of the Chariot, a destination towards which the Chariot is moving as maybe a goal to be achieved, that the Sphinx is developing visionary takes upon, right? That become more technically correct and realized over time, right? Until the goal is finally reached and you are an expert in the field, right? You're an expert in the field because you've experienced the entire field of that travel, okay, towards your goal. Then you've got Anubis, a simian form, which is a further developed along form that's actually going up the ladder or wheel towards Sphinx status. It's got combed hair, neatly maintained, so it's like a student in college, right? It's wearing the appropriate clothing and is properly tempered for class participation On a cultural level, you never do anything but enhance the class, on the terms of the individual presenting the class, right? You never do anything to detract from the class or disrupt the class, right? You should learn that, very early on going to school. But we use heavy-handed means of trying to teach that lesson, so you wind up with a lot of rebellion in school environments. So, we haven't learned how to do that with full effect yet. The genuine method of maintaining such a state of, classhood or class situation is not with, the paddle as much as with social interaction, going back and forth. Somebody's presenting a class. Students are, naturally tempered to receive the lessons and contribute at the right time to the process, raising the hand at the right time. The hand being raised is a Capricorn symbol. It is raised out of Aries, right? Usually in association with a question, which is a hanged man symbolism, right? So we're trying to get to a point, right? From hanged man perspective, we're a little confused on something. There's an appropriate time to raise the hand, and there are inappropriate times to raise the hand, which is, for much of the class, the inappropriate time. Sometimes you don't learn that lesson until like the last semester of school. Yeah, the lightning bolts are gold, as before. They symbolize the same thing as SS lightning bolts. Emotional reactivity, which very often is negative in scope. Such things, if they're actively promoted and you can be used to undermine you to where you become the hanged man in the end. And you might be, grouped in with somebody that doesn't deserve to be the hanged man nearly as much, to the point where they should be the hanged man, but they're made the hanged man anyway because they're witnesses. That reveals organized crime, right? You group things together disinformatively. You make a PR spin in relation to it, and then you get emotional reactivity out of the population, and then you have a massive lynching going on, right? Some of the individuals maybe deserve it. Others don't. As much, at least. Maybe they just deserve some prison time. Reform, right? Time. So, which is challenging in a prison environment because it tends to foster criminality, right? But you can build temperance against that influence and become more reformed too. So it's best to practice, your own reform in life on your own terms outside of prison if you can, right? You learn to become naturally tempered or automatistically tempered or automatically tempered in life to the point where you're fully appropriate in a given situation in your behavior. To include when fight or flight is definitely necessary. So those come out of the bottom of the card. And of course the golden road is down there, right? As an Aries symbol. Taking on golden properties. But it's also a road to follow of mysterious quality here, because we just see a portion of the road down there in the chariot, right? And we don't even see anything in fortune but these lightning bolts coming up. But actually, according to the description in the tutorial, they're coming out of the stars for some reason. So there's an object relations thing going on here, right? The gold from the bricks is somehow interacting with the illumination of the stars. And you have emotional reactivity expressed, which is, of course, is tempered while you are studying or meditating, right? And also, you learn to temper yourself appropriately in life conducted on a social scale, outside of the house or inside of the house. Yeah, that's supposed to symbolize Zeus somehow, the lightning bolts too. Zeus sending down lightning bolts from on high. Zeus begins with the letter Z. That's Pisces high symbolism at work. Somebody who's in a position to maintain complete solute perspective, as though a pharaoh, right? On top of a big pile of grain with his little accounting book, adding up all the money he's making per pound of grain sold or whatever. So that's the same symbolism as a capstone on a pyramid, Zeus up there. And of course, there's energy collected at these points, these architectural points and corners of these structures, okay? Which can become emotionally reactive, as Napoleon discovered while I believe he was in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. He has some kind of, disturbing experience while in there, a psychical experience, which he never talks about specifically. It likely, in my view, involved obsessional material, which people are naturally embarrassed about. So he's probably, personality-wise, rather obsessive-compulsive anyway, right? And in his own way, unstable along those lines. And then he gets into the pyramid. Bang, he has a really bad psychical experience, which is probably something right out of a movie like Natural Born Killers, with all that back-projected imagery of obsessional material going on in that movie, right? With all the dead bodies and blood and all that kind of stuff. Putrefaction type symbolism going on there associated with Capricorn. Dying processes taking place. Really scary stuff for somebody to experience from within themselves. But sometimes dreams are like that too. There's a Capricorn element to dreams that can make them chaotic along those lines, rather obsessional at times. And your natural temperance might show through and temper that situation in the dream spontaneously, So you wind up tempering yourself somehow in the dream, especially if you're like doing meditations before bed, like described in association with the Chariot trump card, right? You got the triangle with the star in the center. That's the same idea as the bowl. Okay, the triangle is a fully developed shape. It's kind of hidden back there, right? As though contextual, right? So this symbolizes the idea because of the wagon wheel, right? The wheel is also symbolic of the same thing as the bowl. The pinnacle point or axis or axle point in the wheel is somehow associated with peak experience, same way as the point in the center of the bowl with the blood or water or whatever illuminating into manifestation in the bowl, right? In response to meditations of various kinds. One is building wealth when one builds knowledge, right? You're already becoming wealthy as soon as you're learning anything of genuine value to self and others. Value is in the relations, okay? If it helps you relate to others effectively in the world, there's value in it. Unfortunately, there is also such thing as organized criminal value and criminal value, just like there's criminal spirit, okay? So the triangle and star touches base with the symbolism Gemini, so that brings it into the background as contextual. So Gemini is contextual for Cancer. It's the mystery. The triangle is made more mysterious, being behind the wheel and veiled by various means, including energies splashing about, as though they can be on the verge, if they're toward it enough, to being emotionally reactive or unstable along those lines, right? As one practices being an SS person for long enough, one eventually becomes unstable in emotional reactivity. How often did this actually happen? Casually, at least, pretty often. Intensively, to the point of social significance, less often, probably. Being in the SS was probably like being in, a lot of other organizations until a certain decisive time in the war where, you find yourself trapped in it, right? It was a trap all along, a recruitment trap designed by somebody with alchemical knowledge, right? Knew all the right symbolisms to use, right? And entrapping you. Symbolism can be interpreted in multi-purposed fashion or from a variety of approaches or perspectives, right? Even the skull and crossbone symbolism. It means different things depending on how it's used or contexts within which it is framed, okay? So the SS starts out as some kind of, positive seeming movement of social scale designed to defend, right? And it becomes, to a degree, something else, especially after the fact, once the propaganda system, the military propaganda takes hold of it, okay? And this is where you get the power in behind the lynchings that are to take place. How many witnesses of organized crime were murdered in that process? They could have written books that could have filled us in on all the details of what was really going on back then. But these significant people were killed as often as possible, right? So they couldn't write memoirs. The hanged man does not write a memoir. Okay, he just hangs there, taking on illumination over time, and maybe at some point waking up and then, seating himself as some manner of emperor figure. And then the emperor goes through the process of descending the tree all over again, right? To become Miss Aquarius down there in the other corner of the tree performing labors, okay? Serenity expressed ideally, right, while doing your labor in life. But hopefully not as a peasant or somebody who is compulsory destructively maintained as such, who in reality would then be a slave, right? Okay. So there's a certain amount of detachment from the dimension and the symbolism of this triangle with a star in the center and the energy splashing about, which symbolizes Libra. Same idea as the 6 rays in the bowl and the chariot, right? And the sword is supposed to symbolize Mercury, associated with the air element, and also Virgo. Mercury rules Virgo, I believe. Saturn is associated very, very strongly with Virgo also as a weight carried, but this is turned into phallic symbolism and as much alchemy as possible to Capricorn is phallic, and Saturn rules over Capricorn, opposite of Jupiter ruling Cancer, right? And Venus is kind of mediating in the middle, ruling Libra, right? So Capricorn's very important, even though it's very close to Earth experience. It's also toxic. So care must be exercised in earthly matters, right? 10-pointed star, that's where the 10-pointed star is. So that could symbolize Gemini influence. The points are like rays, right? So the rays themselves always symbolize Libra. Electromagnetic rays, sunlight, illumination. 10 of them could symbolize Capricorn influence, which brings on emotional reactivity under the right circumstances, right? Or Gemini influence, which is pure spiritual illumination, right? Interdimensional, so intense that you can't experience it directly, but indirectly it becomes reality. It explicates into reality. Initially in relatively serene and tranquil form in the form of a universe or Cancer. And I think I'll leave you there with that. I think I've talked about everything I can for that particular sign. I guess I could talk about this Great Pyramid of Giza thing for a while. I think I've mentioned practically everything associated with it. But a book was written on the subject of the idea of the Great Giza Pyramid being a grain elevator first in function. Okay. With certain meditations associated with that in the form of accounting and sales, financial transactions, associated with the grain being sold out, which became particularly a pointed process after a certain point in the famine, right, where the cities run out of their food that they stockpiled. And then they are coming to the pharaoh to purchase grain from the pharaoh, as the pharaoh understood ahead of time would be the case, right? So the pharaoh is in the process of, exercising care for the people, providing for the people, but in a rather deceptive fashion, he makes sure it starts out as a social process, right? So it at least starts out that way. The pharaoh is leading the people to protect themselves by storing up grain, right? But there's a certain amount of grain that is under the Pharaoh's hand, according to Moses, and then there's other grains that are collected up in the cities where the population concentrations are, right? But the end result of all this is a centralization of power, which is similar to what's going on with banking in our time, right? In the form where the currency is no longer corn, but bills, you might say. Bills being kind of a Capricorn symbol, billy goat, that sort of thing. Grains are also a Capricorn symbol. Okay. They're produced out of the ground, Capricorn fashion. The ground symbolizing, what's underneath the ground is dark. It's Aries. Pure darkness is down there, as far as our experience goes, at least. The deepest, darkest darkness is down there underground or under the water, right? Where there's so much mystery and terrible things that might take place down there, right? So you got the currency developing kind of out of the ground, but you've got absolution taking place also in the form of the realistic form of relations going on between Judaic peoples, I guess, and Egyptian peoples, where Joseph comes into the picture as an advisor. And after, 2 years of these initial relations, well, not just 2 years, but during the famine, 2 years, right? They actually move into Egypt, to infiltrate into Egypt, right? So they're either taking advantage of knowledge that became available probably out of the mountainous regions where drought is becoming an issue, right? And passing on this knowledge filtered to the Pharaoh in Egypt, right? And then Joseph becomes an advisor to Pharaoh. Now, Khufu was the one who finished the Great Pyramid of Giza, but his father initiated the overall process. Joseph is associated directly, socially speaking, with Khufu, but the lore hasn't established him specifically being associated at all with the father. I forget the name of the Pharaoh previous to Khufu. But let's see. That would imply cultural priest level intelligence transfer going back and forth. Because there's a priesthood in Egypt, and Hebrew culture has always had what you might call, in my view at least, a secret priesthood that they maintain more secretively, not so publicly like in Catholicism or ancient Egyptian culture. Both of these things having been infiltrated by, Judaic culture, okay, and Catholicism, in my views, pretty much been taken over by it. I don't know if they were successful in ancient Egypt, though, but ancient Egypt suffered a downfall that you might call typical of empires. And the process would have been initiated during this drought time, building this big, what eventually became a temple complex kind of situation associated with the dead. But at first it's a grain elevator, a stone grain elevator, with that granite stones being used. The idea is to be able to bank this grain, right, for 7 years. The first 7 years associated with the development of this complex, there was a time of relative plenty. So you have 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, right? The Pharaoh was warned supposedly in a dream, but dreams can be brought on by out-of-body presence means, right? For example, maybe out of Judaic quarters, unbeknownst to Pharaoh, who has an ego, right? To a degree, appropriate degree, maybe to a degree, appropriate. But so you could argue that Pharaoh is being manipulated, and there's a time of relative lack developing. Now, is this brought on deliberately at all? Like in our time, attempts were made to do so in the western part of the United States using orgone accumulators and cloudbusters. Okay. Did they have the ability to do these things back then? Or were they using strictly out-of-body means to bring about the onset of a coming famine, right? For 7 years, they labor at it. And as a result, you get what Wilhelm Reich called Oranor reaction, or an inflammation of production, right? Could be rain producing, plenty of grain production. So they come into the Pharaoh situation and warn him ahead of time, in conjunction with him having this dream, which makes him feel like he's a prophet, which I guess he's supposed to be, being Pharaoh and all that stuff, right? It builds upon his power and he strokes his ego, so to speak, right? So they set up social interaction, culturally speaking, because I guess Judaism, since its time with ancient Babylon, had developed infiltrative capabilities, cultural talent for it, which eventually becomes genetic as it's practiced for long enough, having to do, successful people reproduce, unsuccessful people do not, right? It's breeding rather than evolution, though, because it's deliberately done. So, yeah, it's not natural selection, it's cultural selection. Chosen people, right? That's the same basic idea as evolution. Only it's deliberate. It's calculated. So this becomes their means of infiltrating into ancient Egypt, similar to the way the Colosseum and the destruction of the Second Temple became their way of infiltrating into ancient Rome, out of this land that they occupied back then in, what is now Israel. So 2 years into the famine phase, which is after the 7 years of overproduction that they banked, essentially, in the cities and under Pharaoh's hand, in the form of this big stone grain elevator they built up out in the desert. And of course, it would be designed to protect the grain from things like rodents being in the desert, and also designed a certain way. Polished stone design, right? Granite, for crying out loud. And with guards, an appropriate amount of military presence, but not too much because the place is designed to be defendable, right? Just like you buried gold somewhere, but it's grain rather than gold. So it becomes the same symbolism as the golden road in the chariot card there, right? This grain stored away in the darkness of this, what will become a fully built and very well built pyramid, because it's designed to hold a load of a sort, right, and release it over time to the population. And then once that's done, we no longer have use for it, so we just turn it into a burial chamber, temple complex, item, object on the desert. So it's dual use at the very least. And then the third use is, of course, it's a meditation complex. The whole place symbolizes various forms of meditation associated with accountability, accounting, pounds of grain sold, volume of grain sold for certain amounts of money taken in. Where does all that money go? It probably took the form of gold and silver, right? The Pharaoh apparently spends it on the surfacing of the pyramid and the finishing up of the pyramid, right? This is where, he has a certain amount of money to start out with that can build the grain elevator. But what's left over for his burial chamber? Well, he's going to make that money selling grain and finish off the place as a burial chamber, right? The most grand burial chamber on planet Earth, right? It's the highest quality burial chamber anybody ever produced. But does he really bury himself there? Or does he meditate there? Or both, right? While he's alive, he meditates there. Different kinds of meditation associated with everything from accounting to laying in like a burial chamber situation in the king's chamber. Aries symbolic above the grain elevator, which is Cancer symbolic, right? As a reserve. Cancer is symbolic of serene reserve, like a reservoir that was created for a nearby city, right? That's a Cancer symbol. The grain elevator inside the temple or the pyramid is symbolic of Cancer. The king's chamber above there is Aries symbolic, where the king goes and meditates. Probably sometime during the day or during his accounting activities, right? His sales activities. He goes up there. The queen's chamber down below is symbolic of Libra, below Cancer. And then down below that, you've got another secret chamber down there. That's Capricorn symbolic, where secret stuff probably went on of some kind or another. Goat network related, that, similar to what goes on with goat networking today. Ritual activities. Of course, the entire complex is engaged in the ritual of selling grain, right? So the worship of the gods or goddesses associated with grain production, the ritual activity probably happens down there in the secret chamber on the bottom. These are all different meditation chambers, basically. So you can fashion them and make use of them, and then remove those fashionable items later and leave nothing in there. No clue as to what went on with that place. That's part of the riddle of the place, right? The Sphinx has a riddle. If you can answer the riddle, the Sphinx dies or something like that, according to the Greeks. The Greeks probably understood this stuff secretly. They went ahead and kept the secret. But the riddle is, what the heck is this temple complex for? Is it just a burial chamber? Well, there's nobody buried in there, is there? Seems like they buried a lot of stuff around for some reason, probably including the pharaohs. They rather grandly buried some princesses and queens in smaller pyramids alongside these 3 huge pyramids. But the other 2 huge pyramids, both of which are smaller in stature, as though memory is fading of these times, right? The sons of the pharaoh, they die out and the dynasty ends, and then we go into the middle kingdom, right, from the old kingdom. Or the 4th dynasty becomes the 5th dynasty or something like that. And of course, during this 4th dynasty, there's a centralization of power that develops, that becomes corrupted, predictably, Hebrew. And a more hostile expression of Egyptian culture takes over, which they decide they don't like these Jewish people. And they eventually get kicked out of Egypt. I guess probably Moses' time or something like that, 400 years later. So they become exiled from Egypt. But this is something they expect to happen anyway, right? They're practicing the art of bringing down empires, right? Just like the CIA practices the art of bringing down governments all over the world. For what? Banking. And I guess I'll just leave you there with that.